You made me believe I was powerless. Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady in a way that made every person in that room hold their breath. You were wrong. The man across from her, the one who had spent 2 years convincing her that she was nothing without him, said nothing. Because for the first time in his life, Ryan Mitchell had no script left to follow. Nobody walks into a roadside diner planning to change their life. Emma Carter certainly didn't. She walked in, terrified, sleeve pulled down over her left wrist, eyes checking the parking lot every 30 seconds. What happened next, what one gray-bearded biker in a corner booth noticed, and what he chose to do about it, would ripple through Bakersfield, California in ways that nobody, least of all Emma, could have predicted. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. The summer of that year came down on Bakersfield like a punishment. Triple digits by 9 in the morning. Asphalt that went soft under your boots by noon. The kind of heat that made people short-tempered and impatient, that stripped away whatever patience they'd managed to hold on to through the cooler months and left them raw and irritable and looking for somewhere cool to sit and breathe. The Route 99 diner sat just off the highway, a place that had been feeding truckers, families, and local regulars for going on 30 years. It wasn't fancy. The vinyl on the booth seats had started cracking somewhere around 2008, and nobody had gotten around to replacing it. The ceiling fans worked hard, but never quite kept up with the heat. The coffee was strong and cheap, and the pie was genuinely good, and on a scorching Tuesday morning in late July, that was enough. Lily Morgan had been working the morning shift since 6. She was 24 years old, 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of tired that settles into your bones after 3 back-to-back shifts in a week. She moved through the diner the way experienced servers always do, efficiently, without wasted motion. Her eyes scanning tables while her hands refilled cups, and her mind kept a running inventory of who needed what and when. She noticed the woman the moment she walked through the door. That wasn't unusual. Lily noticed everyone who walked through the door. 3 years behind a counter had turned her into a student of people, the way they held their shoulders, whether they made eye contact, what their hands were doing when they thought nobody was looking. It was something she'd developed unconsciously, the way anyone develops instincts when they spend enough time paying attention. But this woman stopped her cold. She was young, late 20s, Lily guessed, with blonde hair that might have been pretty if it had been washed recently, and a face that had clearly been beautiful once and still was underneath whatever it was carrying right now. She was wearing a long-sleeve shirt. In Bakersfield, in July, in 102 degrees of afternoon heat, Lily felt the back of her neck go tight. The woman she would learn her name was Emma Carter, though not yet, not for a while, moved to a booth near the middle of the diner. Not the front where the windows were, not the back where it was private, the middle where she could see both exits without being obvious about it. She sat down and immediately turned to look through the window toward the parking lot. Lily followed her gaze without making it look like she was following her gaze. Black pickup truck, engine running despite the heat, parked at an angle that gave the driver a clear view of the diner's front entrance. She picked up a coffee pot and walked over. "Morning," she said, keeping her voice light. "Coffee." The woman turned back from the window. Her eyes were blue and they were moving too fast. Scanning Lily's face, the room behind her, the window again, back to Lily. "Please," she said. Her voice was soft and a little hoarse, like someone who had been either crying or not sleeping, or both. "You want to see a menu, or do you know what you want?" "I'll just coffee's fine." A pause. "Actually, maybe some toast." "Sure thing." Lily poured the coffee, set down a creamer, and moved away without making the moment into anything. That was the art of it, making someone feel seen without making them feel watched. There was a difference, and it mattered. She put the toast order in and kept moving through her section, but one part of her attention stayed fixed on that booth. Emma Carter wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, the way people do when they're cold. Except it wasn't cold in here. It was never cold in here, and then she looked at the window again. Then at the door. Then back at the window. Her jaw was tight. Her right foot, Lily could see it from this angle, was bouncing steadily under the table. The truck in the parking lot hadn't moved. Lily refilled coffee at the counter, took a plate to table 6, made small talk with old Don Reardon, who came in every Tuesday for scrambled eggs and never wanted to talk about anything except his late wife's garden, and all the while kept Emma Carter in her peripheral vision. Something was wrong. She didn't know exactly what it was yet, but something was wrong. She brought the toast over, set it down. Jelly's on the side there if you want it. Thank you. Emma looked up at her, and for just a second, maybe less than a second, there was something behind her eyes, a flicker, like someone trying to figure out if they could trust the ground they were standing on. Then it was gone. She looked back at the window. Lily walked back to the counter. There were 4 other customers in the diner right now. Don at his regular stool, a trucker she didn't recognize nursing coffee at the far end of the counter, a young couple sharing a stack of pancakes near the door, and one other person sitting alone in the corner booth back to the wall, positioned where he could see the entire room at once. Rex Callahan. Most of the regulars in Bakersfield knew who he was, or knew of him at least. He came in once or twice a week, usually mid-morning when the rush had cleared. He always sat in the same corner, always ordered the same thing, black coffee, the breakfast platter, extra bacon. He tipped well and spoke quietly and never gave anyone a reason to be uncomfortable, which was notable, given that he was 6'2", built like a man who had spent decades doing hard physical work, and wearing a leather vest that made his affiliations clear to anyone who knew what they were looking at. He was 55 years old. His hair had gone mostly gray. His beard was full and shot through with white. There were lines in his face that had been put there by weather and years and things she suspected she didn't want to know about. His eyes were dark and calm and missed absolutely nothing. Rex Grim Callahan had been coming to this diner for 7 years. Lily had served him hundreds of times. She had never once seen him look rattled. He was looking at Emma Carter's table. Not obviously. Not in a way that would alarm anyone who didn't know to look. His coffee was in his right hand. His eyes moved around the room with the casual, easy rhythm of someone simply sitting and existing. But she caught the pattern, and the pattern kept returning to the blonde woman in the middle booth with the long sleeves and the nervous eyes. He saw it too, Lily realized. Whatever she was seeing, he was seeing it too. She brought him a coffee refill he hadn't asked for. He looked up at her, and she held his gaze for just a half-second longer than normal. He gave a small, barely perceptible nod. Neither of them said a word. She went back to her station. Emma's toast was half-eaten. The coffee mug was empty. She looked at the parking lot again, and this time something shifted in her face, something that might have been panic, if panic had been wrung out and flattened into a kind of dull, exhausted dread. Lily watched her reach into her bag, pull out her phone, look at it, then set it face down on the table without opening it. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then Emma Carter placed her hand flat on the countertop on the table surface in front of her, and her fingers moved. It was so small. If you hadn't been watching closely, if you hadn't already been paying the kind of attention that something in Lily's gut had demanded she pay, since the moment Emma walked through the door, you would have missed it entirely. A subtle positioning of the fingers, a gesture that most people would have read as nothing as fidgeting as someone absently drumming while they thought about something else. But it wasn't. Lily's whole body went still. She knew that gesture. She had learned it years ago, not in a formal class or training session, but from her older sister, who had spent 2 years working a crisis hotline in college, and who had sat down with Lily one night and said, "There are ways people ask for help when they can't ask out loud. You should know them." The gesture Emma was making was one of those ways, a specific, deliberate positioning of the hand and thumb that, in the right context, with the right eyes watching, said one thing very clearly. "I am not safe. Help me." Lily stood completely still for a moment. She didn't want to misread this. She didn't want to project. She'd been wrong about things before, thought she'd seen something that wasn't there. And the consequences of being wrong here, of escalating a situation that didn't need escalating, of spooking someone who was already frightened, could be serious. But the long sleeves were still there. The truck in the parking lot still had its engine running, and Emma Carter's hand was still positioned on the table, the gesture still visible. Her eyes carefully pointed in any direction, but at Lily, as if she needed to be able to claim it was nothing if nothing happened. Lily looked at Rex Callahan. He was already looking at her, and his expression told her that whatever she'd seen, whatever she'd concluded, he had reached the same place. She walked back toward the counter, slowly, methodically, the way she always moved, and she began wiping down the surface with a cloth. Normal, routine, nothing to see. But she moved to where she was directly across from Emma's table, and she gave the woman one long, deliberate look. Then she gave a single small nod. Emma Carter's breath caught. Her hand went still on the table. For For a second, she looked like she might cry, and then she looked like she was refusing to cry, and then she looked like a woman who had just been told for the first time in longer than she could remember that someone was paying attention. Lily turned and walked toward Rex's corner. She set down a check he hadn't asked for, leaned briefly over the table as if clearing something, and said very quietly, "The woman in the middle booth, long sleeves, she just used the sign." Rex didn't move, didn't change expression. His voice came out at normal conversational volume, calm and steady. "I saw it. The black truck outside is watching her. Engine's been running since she jumped in." He picked up his coffee, took a slow sip. "How long has she been here?" 20 minutes, maybe." He nodded once, set the cup down, and then he said just as quietly, "Go take care of your other tables. Don't change anything." She went back to her section. She took Don's empty plate. She refilled the trucker's coffee. She brought syrup to the young couple. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice stayed normal. But her heart was going very fast, and she kept one steady corner of her attention on both the corner booth and the middle booth and the black pickup truck that still hadn't moved in the parking lot. Rex Callahan sat for another 3 minutes. He finished his coffee. He didn't take out his phone, didn't make any visible gesture, didn't do anything at all that would have caught anyone's attention. Then he stood up, laid his money on the table, and walked slowly toward Emma Carter's booth. He didn't stop. He walked past her close enough that she could hear him without anyone else in the room catching it, and he said 2 words as he passed. "I see you." Emma Carter's hands wrapped around her empty coffee mug went white at the knuckles. Rex Callahan walked outside, and then Emma Carter, for the first time since she'd walked through that door, stopped looking at the parking lot, because Rex was already out there. She heard it before she saw it, the low building rumble that you felt in your chest before your ears registered it. It started as a single note, low and distant, and then it multiplied. 3, then 5, then more. The sound of engines gathering, not rushing, not racing, but arriving with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of people who had nowhere to be except exactly where they were going. Through the diner window, Emma watched motorcycles roll into the parking lot. Not a swarm, not a mob. They came in slowly, single file, and they positioned themselves with the kind of unhurried certainty that communicated something very specific. We are here. We have chosen to be here, and we are not going anywhere. The black pickup truck was still there. The motorcycles arranged themselves. Emma counted 7, then 9. Then she stopped counting. The truck's engine was still running, but it didn't move. Inside the diner, the young couple at the front table had turned to look out the window. Don Reardon craned his neck. The trucker at the counter said nothing, but his eyes were sharp and tracking. Lily behind the counter felt something complicated move through her. Relief and anxiety, and something that might have been awe, although she couldn't have said exactly why. Emma Carter had not looked at the window. She was staring at the table, at her own hands, and Lily watched something change in her face, not all at once, not cleanly, but in stages, the way ice doesn't melt in a single moment, but in small, incremental surrenders to warmth. The tightness around her eyes loosened very slightly. The set of her jaw, which had been rigid since she walked in, softened by maybe the smallest degree. The door opened. Rex Callahan came back inside. He walked directly to Emma Carter's booth and sat down across from her. He didn't ask permission. He didn't apologize for intruding. He set his forearms on the table and he looked at her. Not with intensity, not with the pressing, demanding look of someone who needed something from her, but with the calm, settled steadiness of a person who had all the time in the world and no agenda except to be there. Emma stared at him. He said, "My name is Rex. People call me Grim. Don't ask me why right now, it's a long story." He said it without any particular lightness, but it wasn't without warmth either. "You don't have to tell me anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to look at me if you don't want to." She looked at him. He said, "The truck is still outside." She said nothing. "Is that your vehicle?" She shook her head. The movement was small, barely there. "Whose is it?" A long pause. Her eyes went to the window, then came back to him. "My boyfriend," she said. The word came out careful, shaped like something she'd rehearsed saying in a normal tone of voice for such a long time that it had lost all its contours. Rex nodded, just nodded. "He'd been out there the whole time you've been in here. He dropped me off, said he'd wait." Her fingers moved on the table. "He always waits." Rex was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long has he been waiting?" She understood exactly what he was asking. She could hear it the way the question had a second layer beneath its surface, a depth she wasn't sure she was ready to step into. She said, "A long time." Rex looked at her steadily. "The sign you used," he said. "Do you know what it means?" She closed her eyes, just briefly, like someone steadying themselves. "Yes." "Who taught you?" She stopped, opened her eyes. "A friend from before." She said it like before was a country she'd been deported from. "A good friend," Rex said simply. She almost smiled. Didn't quite get there. "She was worried about me. She made me learn it. She said if I was ever somewhere and I needed help, but I couldn't say it, use the sign and hope someone was paying attention. She sounds smart. I haven't talked to her in 8 months." Her voice didn't break on this. It just said it flatly, plainly, the way people state facts that they've had to make peace with. Rex let that sit for a second. "Why not?" Emma looked at the table. He didn't like her. The diner was doing its normal morning business around them. Plates clattering, the low hum of the ceiling fans, Don Reardon finishing up his eggs, the couple near the front paying their bill, gathering themselves to leave, the trucker asking Lily for a slice of that apple pie. And in the middle of all of it, Emma Carter sat across from a gray-bearded biker she'd never met before. And something behind her eyes was working through something old and layered and very heavy. Rex said, What's your name, Emma?" "Emma." He said it the way older people say names, not performing anything, just acknowledging. "I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions, and I'm not going to push you toward anything, but I want you to know something because I think someone needs to say it to you." He paused. "You don't have to go back to that truck." Emma Carter went very still. "I want to be clear about what I'm saying," Rex continued. "I'm not talking about today. I'm not talking about the next 10 minutes. I'm talking about the thing you're going to hear in your head when you walk out that door, the voice that tells you there's no other option, there's nowhere to go, there's nobody who will believe you, there's no way out except back." He held her gaze. "That voice is lying to you." Her jaw tightened. "I've seen this before," he said, not in some abstract read about it way. "I mean, I've sat across from women who looked exactly like you, look right now. And I've watched what happened to the ones who kept believing that voice, and I've watched what happened to the ones who stopped. And I am telling you with everything I know that the voice is a liar." Her eyes were wet. She wasn't letting herself blink. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. All I'm asking you to do is sit here for another few minutes and drink your coffee and know that you are not alone in this room." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Why do you care? You don't know me." Rex thought about this for a second. He picked up the coffee mug Lily had somehow quietly appeared and refilled without either of them noticing. He said, "Because 22 years ago, someone sat across from a woman I loved and didn't say any of those things, and she went back to the wrong person, and she died before she got another chance. And I have had 22 years to think about what might have been different if someone had just—" He stopped, set the mug down. "If someone had just sat down and said what needed saying." The silence that followed was dense and real. Emma Carter pulled in a long, careful breath. She held it for a second. Then she said, "He's going to come in if I'm gone too long." "No," Rex said, "he's not." She looked at the window. The pickup truck was still there, but surrounding it, positioned with a kind of casual, inevitable authority, were 9 motorcycles and the men who'd ridden them. One of them, a large man with a red beard, who Rex would later introduce as Danny, though Emma didn't know that yet, was leaning against his bike in a way that placed him directly between the truck's driver's side door and the diner's entrance. Ryan Mitchell was in that truck, and he was not getting out. "Oh," Emma said softly. She said it the way someone says something when they suddenly understand something they've been trying to understand for a very long time. Then she pressed her lips together hard, and 2 tears went down her face, and she wiped them away fast and angry, like she hadn't meant to let them come. Rex didn't say anything. He just sat there. Lily appeared at the table. She set down a fresh cup of coffee and a slice of pie peach, the good kind, the kind Lily always saved for people who looked like they needed something real. And she looked at Emma and she said simply, "You want anything else? You just let me know." And then she walked away because Lily Morgan had good instincts, and good instincts included knowing when to leave people alone. Emma looked at the pie. She laughed. It came out small and surprised like something she hadn't expected to do. I wasn't even hungry, she said. Eat it anyway, Rex said. You look like you haven't been taking care of yourself. She looked at him. You're bossy. I've been told, he said. She took a bite of the pie, and something in her face just for that moment, just briefly, was something other than afraid. Rex watched her, and he thought about all the things he still needed to say, all the practical questions that would have to come eventually, where she was staying, whether she had people, what the situation at home actually looked like, what kind of help she needed, and what kind she'd accept. He thought about Sarah Williams, who he'd known for 4 years, who did this work for a living and did it well, and who he could call within the next hour if Emma was willing. He thought about the resources that existed, the people who could help, the steps that usually needed to happen. But he'd been doing this long enough to know that none of that was the first step. The first step was a woman alone in a diner eating pie and really knowing, maybe for the first time and longer than she should have had, to wait, that there were people in the room paying attention. Outside, the truck still hadn't moved. Inside, Emma Carter set down her fork and looked at Rex with an expression that was 2 parts terror and 1 part something new. Something tentative and fragile but real. Way the first green thing that grows after a fire is real, and she said, what happens now? Rex said, that's up to you, but whatever you decide, you don't decide it alone. She looked down at her coffee. She said, I don't really know where to start. Nobody does, he said. That's okay. We start with right now. We start with this table and this coffee and the fact that you made a sign that said you needed help and somebody saw it. That's where we start. A pause. Then Emma said in a voice that was barely there, barely audible over the ceiling, fans, and the background noise of the diner. I've been so scared for so long. Rex nodded slowly. I know. He told me. She stopped, started again. He told me that nobody would believe me, that people would think I was crazy, that I was lucky to have him because nobody else would. She stopped again. Her jaw worked. He has a lot of friends in this town, important people. He told me if I ever said anything, he'd make sure everyone knew I was. She shook her head. He was wrong, Rex said. Not harshly, not performatively, just with a quiet, settled certainty. About all of it. How do you know? She looked at him directly. You just met me. Because I've heard that exact speech before, he said. Word for word, almost. And I'll tell you something about the men who give that speech. They give it because they're afraid. Not of you specifically, of losing control, of someone seeing through the picture they've built, of people finding out who they actually are. He picked up his coffee. A man who's secure in who he is doesn't need to convince you that you're worthless. He doesn't need to cut you off from everyone who cares about you. He doesn't need to wait in a parking lot to make sure you don't talk to anyone. He put the coffee down. Ryan Mitchell is afraid of you, Emma. That's what this has always been about. Emma stared at him. Nobody had said that to her before. She could tell from the way her face moved when she heard it, the slight disorientation, the almost imperceptible flinching, the way she processed it like a new language, like something she understood the words of individually, but whose combined meaning was still taking shape. He's afraid of me, she said slowly. He's terrified of you, Rex said. That truck in the parking lot? That's not control, that's fear with an engine running. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the truck still sat. The motorcycle still surrounded it. And then Emma Carter looked down at her hand, the hand that had made the small, silent gesture on the table, the gesture that most of the world would have looked right past, and she opened it slowly, palm up, like someone releasing something they'd been holding too tight for too long. She said, I want to know what comes next. Rex looked at her. He said, then we're going to need to make a phone call. She nodded. She didn't look at the parking lot. For the first time since she'd walked through that door, Emma Carter was looking forward. Rex made the call from the diner's back hallway, standing just far enough from the dining room that Emma couldn't hear the specific words, but close enough that she could see him through the gap in the door, could see that he was still there, still present, still occupying the same physical space as her situation. That mattered more than he probably knew. Emma sat with her hands wrapped around her third cup of coffee and tried to remember the last time she'd made a decision for herself. Not a small decision, not what to order or what to wear or what route to take home. A real decision. The kind that had weight to it, that had consequences that belonged entirely to her and not to the architecture of fear that Ryan had spent 2 years building around her life. She couldn't remember. That was the honest answer. She could not remember. Lily drifted past and refilled the cup without being asked, and Emma watched her and thought about how that small, unremarkable act of attentiveness, just seeing that a cup was empty and filling it was something Ryan would never do. Had never done. In 2 years, she could not produce a single memory of Ryan Mitchell noticing that she needed something and simply quietly providing it. Not once. She filed that away somewhere. It felt important in a way she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Rex came back from the hallway. He sat down across from her, and before he could say anything, she said, "Who did you call? A woman named Sarah Williams?" He said. "She works with people in difficult situations. She's good at what she does, not in a clinical textbook way, in a human way. She's been through some of it herself." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of difficult situations?" "Your kind," Rex said, simply, no performance in it. Emma looked at the table. I don't want to be a project for somebody." "She won't make you a project," he said. "She'll make you a priority. That's different." And Emma considered this. Outside through the window, she was deliberately not looking at the truck was still there. She knew without looking. She could feel it the way you can feel a bruise even when nothing's touching it, a constant low awareness that didn't go away. "What did you tell her?" she asked. "Just that someone needed to talk to her today and that it was time sensitive." He paused. "I didn't tell her anything about you." "That's yours to tell or not tell." Something in Emma's chest loosened the smallest degree. She'd been bracing for the opposite, for the well-meaning machine of other people's decisions to start rolling for her situation to become a story that got told about her rather than by her. It had happened before once 2 towns ago, and a lifetime back when a neighbor had called the police without asking and the police had come, and Ryan had been charming and calm, and afterward, she stopped that train of thought before it got where it was going. "How soon?" she asked. 20 minutes, Rex said. "She can meet us here or somewhere else, whatever you're comfortable with." "Here is fine." She looked at him. "I know you have people outside. I don't know how long they can stay." "As long as it takes," he said, and he said it the way people say things when they mean them, rather than when they're trying to sound like they mean them. Emma had spent 2 years learning the difference. "He's going to come in eventually," she said. "Ian, he has a temper. Not usually in public, but—" She stopped. "He'll be running out of patience by now." "Let him run," Rex said. Emma looked at him. "You don't know what he's like." "I've met men like him before." "Not like him," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, not boastful, not dramatic, just weary and flat with the kind of certainty that only comes from experience that made Rex go quiet for a second. He studied her face. "Tell me," he said. So she did. She didn't start at the beginning. Nobody who's been through what Emma had been through starts at the beginning because the beginning looks from the inside like nothing at all. The beginning looks like someone bringing you flowers. The beginning looks like someone texting to ask where you are because they were worried. The beginning looks like love because that's the entire point of the beginning. It's engineered to look like love. She started in the middle. She told him about the first time Ryan had grabbed her arm in a way that left a mark and how he'd cried afterward, genuinely cried, she thought at the time, and told her that she made him crazy, that he'd never felt this way about anyone, that if she would just not push him, if she would just understand how much he loved her, this would never happen again. She told him about her friend Dana, who had taught her the sign, who had sat with her one night about a year into the relationship and said quietly and without making it a confrontation, "Emma, I'm worried about you." And how Ryan had found out about that conversation, she still didn't know how, and had spent 3 weeks methodically dismantling her friendship with Dana. Not dramatically, not in a single argument. Quietly, patiently, the way water erodes stone. A comment here. A planted doubt there. "And I just don't think she's good for you. I see the way she makes you feel bad about yourself." Delivered at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right tone, until Emma had found herself almost without noticing seeing Donna less and less, and then not at all. She told him about her job. She'd been working at a pediatric clinic, doing administrative work, and she'd been good at it, and she'd liked it, and the people there had liked her. And how Ryan had started showing up at lunch, then calling during the day, then driving past the building when he was supposed to be at work himself, and how her supervisor, a kind man named Dr. Patel, had taken her aside once and asked carefully if everything was all right at home. And she had said yes, of course. She was fine because saying anything else felt like lighting a match near a gas leak. She left that job 8 months ago. She told Rex she'd left because she'd wanted a change. The truth which she heard herself telling him now in the middle booth of a roadside diner in Bakersfield was that Ryan had made staying more terrifying than leaving. Rex listened. He did not interrupt. He did not make sounds of sympathy or outrage. He just listened with his full attention, the way very few people listen. And occasionally he would ask a question, a short factual question, not designed to redirect or to judge, just to clarify. And she would answer it, and she heard herself answering it. And part of her was watching herself from a slight distance, the way you watch yourself in a dream, astonished. She had not said any of this out loud before. Not the whole of it, not in order, not connected. She had said pieces of it to herself in the bathroom mirror with the door locked. She had composed versions of it in her head during the long nights when Ryan was asleep, and she was staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had become this specific shape. But she had never said it to another human being. It felt like putting down something very heavy. She stopped, took a breath. "Sorry," she said automatically. Rex frowned slightly. "What are you apologizing for?" "I don't," she blinked. "I don't know. I always apologize when I talk too much." He looked at her steadily. "He taught you that?" She opened her mouth, closed it, because yes, he had absolutely taught her that the way you train a reflex over and over and over until the behavior runs without thinking, until you apologize for taking up space the way you breathe, automatic and unconscious and constant. "Yeah," she said quietly. "You don't owe me an apology," Rex said. "You don't owe anyone an apology for talking." She nodded, her throat felt thick. "He's going to be angrier than I've ever seen him," she said, and she said it not as a bid for sympathy but as a logistical statement, a fact she was sitting with. "He watches me. He has a way of knowing things. He checks my phone. Not obviously, not like he sits there and reads it in front of me, but I've gone to look for something and it's in a different position than I left it, or I'll see that something has been opened that I didn't open. He has the password to my email. He put a Find My Phone thing on my phone and told me it was, so I'd never get stranded somewhere and he wouldn't know." She paused. "I only figured out what it actually was about 3 months ago." Rex's jaw had tightened, but his voice stayed measured. "Your phone is in your bag right now." "Yes." "Okay," he thought for a second. "Don't turn it off. That'll alert him. Just leave it where it is for now. Sarah will know what to do about that." Emma looked at him. She stopped. "This is a lot. You don't even know me. Why is this something you're willing to do?" Rex was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I tell you something about the name Grimm?" She hadn't forgotten he'd mentioned it. She nodded. "I got that name when I was 28 years old, he said. "I had a girlfriend named Carol. She was 30, smart as anybody I ever knew. Funny in a way that made you feel like the world was better than it usually looked. She was also in a situation she couldn't get out of or thought she couldn't." He stopped. "I knew it was bad. I saw the signs. I didn't say anything because in those days I told myself it wasn't my business. Told myself she'd handle it. Told myself if she wanted help, she'd ask for it." He looked at the table. "She asked for help. Not out loud. She asked the way you asked today with a gesture that most people missed." Emma was very still. "I missed it," Rex said. "I saw it and I told myself I was reading too much into it. And 3 weeks later, she was in a hospital, and then she wasn't anywhere anymore." He looked up. "The name came afterward. My crew gave it to me, not as a punishment, as a reminder. Grim, like grimly determined, like somebody who wasn't going to look away again." He held Emma's gaze. "I have not looked away in 27 years. I'm not about to start today." The air between them was very still. Emma Carter, who had spent 2 years being told she was the problem, being told she was too sensitive, being told she imagined things and exaggerated things and made up things to get attention, sat across from a man who had looked directly at the most frightening truth of her life and not flinched. And she started to cry. Not the careful, controlled tears from earlier, not the kind you can swipe away with the back of your hand and keep your face composed. The real kind, the kind that come from somewhere deep and have been waiting a long time for permission. Rex didn't move around to her side of the booth. He didn't reach across the table. He stayed exactly where he was, and he let her cry, which was exactly right. Because the thing Emma needed in that moment was not comfort in the sense of someone wrapping things up and making them smooth. She needed space. She needed to cry in front of another human being without that person either panicking or trying to stop it. Lily appeared briefly, set a box of napkins on the table, and disappeared without a word. Emma laughed a little through the tears. "She's good," she said. "One of the best," Rex said. Emma pulled herself back together the way strong people do, not by stopping what she felt, but by deciding what she did with it. She wiped her face. She breathed. She sat up straighter. "Okay," she said. "What do I need to know?" The door to the diner opened. Not the front door. The side door, the one near the bathrooms, the one that technically wasn't a customer entrance, but that also wasn't locked. Emma didn't see it immediately. She was facing the wrong direction. But she felt it. She felt the change in Rex's posture, the way he came into a different kind of alertness, without moving, without changing his expression, just a subtle shift in the quality of his attention that she was learning to read. She turned. Ryan Mitchell was standing inside the diner. He was 34 years old, and he was, by anyone's honest assessment, a good-looking man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy physical confidence that read as charisma until you knew what it was actually built on. He was wearing a light blue button-down sleeves rolled up like a man on a casual errand, not like someone who had spent the last 45 minutes sitting in a parking lot watching his girlfriend through a diner window. He was smiling. That was the part that made Emma's stomach drop. Not the anger she'd braced for, not the hard jaw and the clipped voice that she knew meant trouble later. The smile. Because the smile was the performance, and when Ryan was performing, it meant he was calculating, and when he was calculating, he was at his most dangerous. His eyes went straight to her, passed to Rex, came back to her. The smile didn't change. "Hey, babe," he said. "You were gone a while. Thought you might need some company." He walked toward the table, easy and loose-limbed, the way a man walks when he's certain of his welcome. He stopped when Rex didn't move. Rex was still sitting across from Emma. He had not turned around. He had not stood up. He hadn't done anything at all, which in this context was its own very specific message. Ryan's smile developed a slight edge. "I don't think we've met," he said. Rex turned then slowly and looked up at Ryan. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at him with the calm, measuring attention of a man who has taken the full measure of many men and is not particularly concerned about what he finds. "Rex," he said. Ryan waited for more. Didn't get it. "Ryan," he said, extending iron to him. Rex looked at the hand, did not take it. Ryan let the hand drop. The edge in his smile got sharper. "You a friend of Emma's?" "I am now," Rex said. The air in the diner had changed. Don Reardon at the counter had stopped pretending not to listen. Lily had positioned herself behind the counter in a way that placed her close to the phone on the wall. The trucker had set down his fork. Ryan looked at Emma. "You ready to go, babe? We had plans today." Emma's heart was slamming in her chest. She felt the pull of it, the old practiced gravitational pull of capitulation, of smoothing things over, of saying yes, of course, sorry I took so long, and standing up and following him out the door, and spending the rest of the day managing the fallout of the fact that she'd made him wait. She felt it the way you feel in undertow, not just as a force on your body, but as something in the current of your whole existence. She did not stand up. She looked at Ryan and said, "I'm not ready yet." The smile went very still on Ryan's face. It was still there technically, but it had stopped being a smile in any meaningful sense. It was a shape his mouth was holding while his eyes did something else entirely. "Emma," he said, and the way he said her name was a whole sentence. "I'm going to stay a little longer," she said. Her voice wasn't as steady as she wanted it to be, but it was there. "I'll get home later." "I'll drive you," he said. "I don't need a ride." Ryan looked at Rex. "Did you tell her that?" he said, and for the first time the pleasantness slipped just for a second, just long enough to show what was underneath it. "Did you tell her she doesn't need a ride?" Rex said. "She told me herself." "She doesn't know what she Ryan stopped himself. Recalibrated. The pleasantness came back slightly ragged around the edges. Emma, honey, you don't know this guy. I'm just looking out for you. I know, Emma said. And something about the way she said it, flat and certain and containing within it, a kind of answer to a much larger question made Ryan go very still. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked around the diner at Lily behind the counter, at Don Reardon, who wasn't pretending to look away anymore at the trucker, with his arms folded at the booth near the back, where two more men had come in quietly and sat down at some point in the last few minutes, and were watching with the calm, settled patience of men who had done this kind of watching before. He looked at the window, at the motorcycles in the parking lot. Emma watched him doing the math, watched him calculating, watched him arrive at a number he didn't like. Ryan Mitchell was many things, but he was not stupid. He looked back at Emma. The smile was entirely gone now. In its place was something flat and controlled and very cold that Emma knew well, had spent 2 years learning the specific temperature of, had learned to read the way a barometer reads weather. "We'll talk at home," he said. "Okay," Emma said. He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he turned and walked back out the side door. The diner was silent for exactly 3 seconds after the door closed. Then Don Reardon said from his stool at the counter, "Good riddance." Lily let out a long breath. Emma realized her hands were shaking. She looked at them with a sort of detached curiosity, like they belonged to someone else. Rex said quietly, "You did good." "I didn't do anything," Emma said. "You stayed in your seat," he said. "That was everything." Her hands were still shaking when Sarah Williams walked through the front door 8 minutes later. Sarah was 41 and she moved through the world like someone who had learned through difficult means exactly how much space she was entitled to take up and had decided the answer was all of it. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. She was medium height with dark eyes and the particular kind of stillness that belongs to people who have sat in the middle of very hard things and come out knowing their own weight. She looked at Emma the moment she walked in, and Emma had the strange, disorienting experience of being seen clearly by someone she'd never met. Sarah slid into the booth beside Rex, looked at Emma and said, "Hi, I'm Sarah. Rex told me exactly nothing about you, which is how I like it, because I want to hear it from you." She put her bag on the seat beside her. "You don't have to tell me anything today, but I want you to know that whatever you've been told about what your options are, I'm here to tell you those options are wider than you think." Emma looked at her. "How do you know what I've been told?" Sarah smiled. It was a real smile, not a professional one. "Because the man who just walked out that side door, I know him. Not personally, but I know the type with the kind of knowledge that takes years to earn." She leaned forward slightly. "They always tell you the same things. That you're alone, that nobody will believe you, that you need them more than they need you, that leaving is harder than staying." She paused. Was I close? Emma felt something unlock in her chest, like a key in a door she'd forgotten was a door. "Word for word," she said. Sarah nodded. "Then let me tell you what they never tell you." She pulled a folder from her bag and laid it on the table. It was simple, nothing official looking, no logos or letterheads, just printed pages with information. "First thing," she said, "you are not the first person to sit in this specific situation. You are not the 100th. You are not the 1,000th. This is not a reflection of your intelligence, your worth, your choices, or your character. This is something that happens to people because other people deliberately engineer it to happen. There's a difference, a big one." Emma's eyes were on the folder, but she wasn't really looking at the pages. She was listening to Sarah's voice. "Second thing," Sarah continued, "there are options right now today that don't require you to have everything figured out. You don't need a plan. You don't need to know what next month looks like. You don't need to be certain. You just need to decide if today is the day you want to start moving in a different direction." She met Emma's eyes. "Sindet?" A long pause. "Opamepman." Emma thought about Ryan's face when she'd said, "I'm not ready yet." The way the smile had gone mechanical. The way he'd said, "We'll talk at home," with that specific temperature in his voice that she'd learned to dread. She thought about her friend Dana, who she hadn't spoken to in 8 months. About Dr. Patel at the clinic, who had noticed and asked, and whom she'd lied to. About the long-sleeve shirt she'd put on this morning, automatically without thinking about it, the way you brush your teeth, just routine, just what you did, just how things were. She thought about Rex saying, "You don't have to go back to that truck." She looked at Sarah. "Yes," she said. "I think today is that day." Sarah nodded. She reached across and put her hand briefly over Emma's, not grabbing, not pressing, just a touch. Contact. Present. There. Then she pulled it back and got to work. They spent the next 40 minutes going through the practical reality of Emma's situation. The phone Sarah knew how to handle that had resources that could address it within 24 hours. The apartment, it was in Ryan's name, which was a complication, but not an obstacle, and there were places Emma could go, a network that existed for exactly this. A room that was available and that Ryan had no knowledge of and no way to find. Her identification, her documents, her debit card. Sarah asked about each with the efficient, unfrightened practicality of a person who understood that logistics mattered, that the difference between someone escaping a situation and not escaping it was often entirely logistical. Rex sat quietly through most of this, adding something occasionally when Sarah looked at him, but mostly letting Sarah lead. He knew his role, Lily thought, watching from the counter. He'd been the person who created enough safety for Emma to breathe. Now the work needed someone different. Emma's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her face went carefully neutral, in the particular way that people learn when they've spent a long time managing their visible reactions. Him, Sarah asked. 7 texts, Emma said, in the last 5 minutes. Sarah said, don't answer. Not yet. We'll deal with that. He'll come back, Emma said. I know, Sarah said, and we'll deal with that too. She leaned forward. I want to ask you something. Is there anyone, family, the friend, anyone from before who you trust? Someone outside of Bakersfield, ideally, Emma thought. Her sister in Phoenix. They'd grown apart over the years. Ryan had done that, methodically had planted enough distance that the calls had become occasional, and then Mom. But her sister was still there. She still existed. The last text between them, Emma knew, was 8 weeks old, a brief check-in that Emma had kept deliberately vague. My sister, she said, in Phoenix, Maya. Have you been in contact recently? Not much. She stopped. Not much. Sarah said, would she help you if she knew what was happening? Emma thought about Maya, about the way Maya had looked at Ryan the one time they'd met at Christmas 2 years ago, the subtle, skeptical narrowing of her eyes that Maya had tried to keep off her face and hadn't entirely managed. About how Emma had brushed past it because it was easier. About how Maya had texted her afterward and said, just are you happy? And Emma had texted back, yes, of course, so happy. And Maya had responded with a single period that Emma had spent a week analyzing. Yes, Emma said, she would. Okay, Sarah said, that matters. Emma's phone buzzed again and again. Sarah reached out and without drama turned the phone face down on the table. A little while longer, she said. Emma nodded, but she was thinking about the texts, about Ryan in that parking lot running out of patience, recalibrating planning. She knew how he thought. She knew that right now in that truck, he wasn't sitting in anger, he was sitting in strategy. He was running through his options. He was building the version of events that would make him the reasonable one. The concerned one, the man who'd been minding his own business when a strange group of bikers started interfering in his relationship. He was good at building those versions. She had to give him that. He's going to tell people I'm unstable, Emma said. He's been laying that groundwork for months, telling on his friends I've been anxious, hard to deal with. There are people in this town who are going to believe him. Sarah looked at her steadily. There are also people in this town who are going to believe you. And what matters right now isn't the people who believe him. What matters is getting you safe. Rex said from his side of the table. How much does he know about your routine? Where you go when? Emma almost laughed. Everything. He knows everything. Rex nodded. Then we change the routine. Starting today. It's not that simple, Emma said. It's not simple at all, Rex said. But it's possible, and you've got more people in your corner than you did 2 hours ago. He glanced toward the counter where Lily was visibly, deliberately not eavesdropping, while keeping them both in her periphery, and something passed across his face that might on a less weathered face have been called fond. More than you might think. Emma looked at Lily. Lily caught her looking and gave her a small, matter-of-fact nod, the kind that said, I see you and I meant it, and I'm still here. Emma looked back at her coffee. She thought about the sign she'd made on the table an hour ago. The gesture her friend Dana had taught her years back, the one she'd carried around like a forgotten coin in her pocket, never expecting to use it. Maybe not entirely believing it would matter if she did. Someone had seen it. 2 people had seen it. And sitting here now in a diner in Bakersfield in July, heat with a support worker, laying out options in plain language, and a gray-bearded biker who had made a promise to a dead woman 22 years ago and kept it every day since Emma Carter understood something she hadn't understood when she walked in. She had thought the sign was a last resort. It turned out it was a beginning. Her phone buzzed again on the table, face down, Ryan's name lighting up through the case. Sarah picked up her pen. "Let's talk about today," she said. "Where you sleep tonight, what you take with you, who you call first." Emma looked at the phone, then away from it. "Okay," she said, "let's talk." And for the first time in 2 years, the decisions being made at that table were hers. Rex watched Ryan's truck pull out of the parking lot and felt nothing he hadn't felt 100 times before, the specific, controlled anger of a man who has learned that anger without direction is useless. He let it pass through him and settle somewhere quiet, and then he turned back to the table. Emma was looking at her hands. They were still shaking. "He'll be back," she said. "Mine has a question." "Probably," Rex said. She looked up at him. "Most people would lie to me right now. Tell me he's gone. It's fine, don't worry. Most people haven't spent 30 years dealing with men like him," Rex said. "He'll be back because that's how they work. They leave and then they come back, and the coming back is the move. It's designed to make you feel like you made a mistake by staying." Emma absorbed this. "So what do? We don't wait for him to set the tempo," Rex said. "Sarah's going to help you figure that out. But right now, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "I need you to eat something real," he said. "Not toast, something with protein. Because the next few hours are going to take more out of you than you think. And I've watched people hit the wall at the exact wrong moment because they didn't take care of the physical basics." Emma stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, genuine, slightly helpless laugh that transformed her face entirely. "You're sitting here telling me to order breakfast." "Eggs," he said, "or a burger, whatever they've got." She shook her head, still half laughing, and picked up the menu, and Rex thought that the laugh, small and involuntary and real, was probably the first unguarded sound she'd made in a very long time. Lily was there before Emma had even set the menu down. "Scrambled or over easy?" she asked, like she'd been waiting. "Scrambled," Emma said. "Hash browns or home fries?" "Hash browns." 2 minutes, Lily said, and was gone. Rex said, "Tell me about your apartment." Emma's face shifted back. "What about it?" "You said it's in his name. Lease is his. Utilities are his. I've been paying him my half in cash every month." She paused. "I know what that looks like." "It looks like someone who was being carefully managed," Rex said. "That's not an accident. He kept everything in his name so that leaving would feel impossible." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I have about $400 in a checking account he doesn't know about. I opened it last spring. I used to tell him I was buying lunch and I'd put $5 or $10 cash in the account instead." She said it with something complicated in her face, pride and shame twisted together. $400 in 8 months. That's what my planning looked like. Rex leaned forward. "Look at me." She did. "That account is one of the most important things you've done in the past 2 years, he said. "You were planning without letting yourself know you were planning. That's not weakness. That's the part of you that was always going to get out working underneath everything else." Emma's throat moved. $400 in a secret account, Rex said. "That's not nothing. That's a foundation." Sarah Williams walked through the front door. She moved through this diner with the particular purposefulness of someone who was always calculating the geometry of a room exit sightlines, who was near what. She was 41, dark-haired, and she had the kind of face that had been through enough that it didn't waste energy on pretense. She looked at Emma once, a full assessing look that lasted maybe 2 seconds and clearly contained more information than most people gathered in a 10-minute conversation, and then she sat down. "You must be Emma," she said. "Yeah," Emma said. "I'm Sarah. I work with a program called Clear Path. We help people navigate situations like yours. Everything you tell me is confidential. I'm not affiliated with law enforcement. I'm not here to make decisions for all you." She put a leather notebook on the table but didn't open it. "I'm here because Rex called me, and when Rex calls me, I come, because in 7 years he's never once called me about something that wasn't real." Emma glanced at Rex. 7 years, Rex said. "We met at a community meeting. Long story." "He's modest," Sarah said. He funded half our operating budget for the first 3 years. She said it without ceremony, the way you state a fact that doesn't require embellishment. Emma looked at Rex with an expression that was recalibrating something. You didn't tell me that. Wasn't relevant, he said. It's relevant, Emma said. Sarah let that land and then moved forward. Tell me about this morning, how it started. What got you here? So Emma told it again. This version was more compressed than what she'd told Rex. She was already getting better at telling it, which was both a practical skill and a sad one. Sarah listened the way Rex had listened, without interruption, without the particular kind of sympathy that centers the listener's reaction rather than the speaker's experience. She asked 2 questions, both specific, both logistical. When Emma finished, Sarah said, "The tracking app on your phone, you said he told you it was a Find My Phone safety feature." "Yeah." "Do you know which app?" Emma told her. Sarah wrote it down without visible reaction. "Okay, we can address that, but here's what I need you to understand about the phone right now. Leaving it on and leaving it with you is actually useful for the next few hours. If he checks and your phone is stationary here, he knows where you are, and he's not going to escalate in a public space with Rex's people outside." Emma understood that. She nodded. "The moment that changes," Sarah said, "is when you move. When you leave this diner, the phone becomes a liability. So before you move, we deal with the phone." She paused. "I have a replacement, a prepaid clean nothing on it. It'll be here within an hour. You'll give me your SIM. I'll put it in a Faraday bag, and for the next 48 hours, Ryan will think your phone is wherever that bag is." Emma was quiet for a second. "You just carry a prepaid phone around?" "I carry several," Sarah said. Something shifted in Emma's face. "Not surprised exactly, more like the adjustment you make when you understand that an infrastructure you didn't know existed has existed the whole time, that people have been building and maintaining a system for exactly your situation for years, and that you didn't know about it only because nobody had been able to tell you." "How many people have you helped?" she asked. "With Rex's crew involved directly or counting the broader program?" "Either," Sarah considered. 11 directly with Rex's people in a visible role, a lot more in the background. Emma turned to Rex. "You do this a lot," Rex said, "when it needs doing." "He's modest again," Sarah said with the tone of someone who has had this specific conversation before. The eggs arrived. Emma looked at them like she'd forgotten she'd ordered them, and then she picked up the fork and ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had been told to eat and was doing it as a practical task. Rex watched the color come back into her face incrementally, the way it always did when someone had been running on adrenaline for too long and finally put something real in their body. Between bites, Emma said, "He has a friend on the Bakersfield PD." The table went quiet. "Not like a corrupt cop," she said quickly. "Just they went to school together. They played golf. When I used to think about calling the police, I would think about that." Rex and Sarah exchanged a look that lasted less than a second, but contained an entire conversation. Sarah said, "That's a common tactic, whether it's real or exaggerated. It has the same effect. It makes you feel like the system that's supposed to protect you is actually his." "Is it real?" Emma asked. "The friendship?" "Probably somewhat real," Sarah said, not sugarcoating it. "But here's what's also real. There are protocols in place now that didn't exist 10 years ago. There are officers specifically trained for DTV situations, and there are ways to document what's been happening that don't require you to walk into a police station alone and hope for the best." She paused. "You don't have to deal with the legal side today. Today is about getting you physically safe. The rest comes after." Emma ate, thought, then said, "He's going to go home. When he figures out I'm not coming, he's going to go home and he's going to clean things up." Rex leaned forward slightly. "What things?" He broke a lamp 2 weeks ago during an argument. I swept up most of the glass, but there are still marks on the wall where it hit." She stopped. "He's smart about this. He thinks ahead. If I say anything, if I make any kind of formal complaint, he'll have already dealt with anything that could be evidence." Sarah's pen moved. "That's okay," she said. "What you're describing right now in this conversation matters. Your account matters, and there are things he can't clean up." She looked at Emma steadily. Did anyone else see the lamp incident? A neighbor, anyone? Emma thought. The woman in the unit next door, Mrs. Garza. She's 70. She doesn't miss much. She looked at me the next morning when I was getting the mail, and she said very quietly, "Are you all right, mija?" I said yes. "Do you think she knew?" "I think she knew," Emma said. Sarah wrote something down. "Would she talk to someone?" "I don't know, maybe. She's been in this building a long time. She liked me before Ryan when I'd stop and talk to her in the hallway. After Ryan, I stopped stopping." Rex said, "He isolate you from the neighbors too." Emma looked at him. "He isolated me from everyone," she said. "It wasn't dramatic, it was just gradual. He'd say something slightly off about each person, nothing you could really argue with. She seems like she gossips a lot. He looked at you weird. I don't think they have great values." And I'd think, well, he's probably right. And I'd pull back a little and then a little more. And then one day I'd realize I didn't have anyone left and somehow I'd done it to myself. She put down the fork. Except I hadn't done it to myself. "No," Rex said. "You hadn't." Emma looked at the table. "How does someone do that? How does someone systematically take apart every relationship a person has and make the person feel like they chose it?" "Patience," Sarah said, "and a very clear understanding of how people's minds work when they love someone. When you love someone, you extend benefit of the doubt. You interpret their actions charitably. You tell yourself you're probably being too sensitive or too suspicious. He used your capacity for love against you." The brutality of that, the plainness of it, settled over the table. Emma said, "That's evil." "Yes," Sarah said simply, "it is." Rex's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his expression didn't change in any dramatic way, but Lily, watching from the counter, saw his jaw set slightly, and she knew that look. "What?" Emma said. She'd seen it too. "Danny," Rex said, meaning the red-bearded man outside. "Ryan came back around the block. He's parked on the street now, different position." Emma went still. "He's repositioning," Sarah said, and her voice stayed even. "He can't see inside from where he is now, so he's trying to figure out if you're still here." "I'm still here," Emma said. "Yes," Sarah said, "and we're going to use that." Emma looked at her. "How?" Sarah leaned forward. "Because right now he's uncertain. He doesn't know what you've said or who you've said it to. He doesn't know what we know. And a man like Ryan, a man who needs to control information, being uncertain is the worst thing in the world." She paused. "We let him be uncertain for a while longer. We let him sit out there and not know. Because while he's outside trying to figure out what's happening in here, we're in here actually making things happen." Emma's eyes had sharpened. Something in her face had changed over the last hour. Not dramatically, not a transformation, but a gradual hardening of something that had been soft with fear. She was thinking clearly now. She was eating, she was breathing, she was present. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Sarah said, "First thing, your sister. You said Maya is in Phoenix." "Yes." "Do you know her number by heart?" "Not from your phone. Do you actually know it?" Emma thought for a second. "Yes, I've had it memorized since we were kids." "Good, because in about 40 minutes, you're going to call her from a clean line. Not to ask for anything specific yet, just to make contact, to let her hear your voice and to hear hers." Sarah held Emma's gaze. "When was the last time she heard your voice?" Emma's face changed. 3 months, maybe 3.5. Sarah nodded, didn't comment on it, didn't need to. "What do I tell her?" Emma asked. "The truth," Sarah said, "as much of it as you are ready to say." Emma absorbed this, then, "She's going to be upset that I didn't tell her sooner." "Probably," Sarah said. "She's going to say she knew something was wrong. She texted me after she met Ryan and I told her everything was fine." "Probably," Sarah said again. "I lied to her." Sarah's voice was straightforward and kind at the same time. "You lied to her because telling the truth was dangerous. She's going to understand that." A pause. "Emma, she asked you if you were happy. You told her you were. She sent you a single period in response." Emma looked up sharply. "How did you?" "Because that's what someone does when they know the answer is no, and they don't know how to reach you," Sarah said. "Your sister already knows something. You're not going to be telling her something she hasn't suspected. You're going to be giving her permission to help." The front door of the diner opened. Not Ryan, 2 women, maybe mid-50s, in scrubs, clearly on a work break, talking about something that had nothing to do with any of this. They slid into a booth near the front, and the normal texture of the diner reasserted itself for a moment, the mundane rhythm of people having ordinary days. Emma watched them and thought about ordinary days, what they felt like, how far away they seemed right now, and how badly she wanted them back. "I want my life back," she said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Rex said, "Then we get it back." "It's not that easy." "No," he said, "it's not easy at all. But easy and possible aren't the same thing." Emma's phone buzzed. Then again, then 3 times in rapid succession. Sarah said, "Don't look at it." But Emma had already glanced at the screen. Her face went pale. Rex said, "What?" Emma turned the phone so he could see the messages. The first one said, "I know you're still in there. I can see Lily through the window. Tell her to stay out of our business." The second said, "I have friends in this town, Emma. Real ones, not bikers you just met." The third said, "You're embarrassing yourself and you don't even know it. Come outside, we'll talk in the car." And the fourth, the one that had arrived while Rex was reading the others, said, "I love you." "Don't do this." Rex looked at the messages for a long moment. Sarah took the phone, read them, and set it down face up on the table. "Note the sequence," she said, and her voice was the steady voice of someone who has read 100 versions of these same 4 messages. Threat, status assertion, shaming, plea. That's the full cycle in 4 texts. He's panicking. "He called Lily out by name," Emma said. "He's watching through the window. He can see us." "He can see that you're still sitting here," Sarah said. "He can't see what's happening at this table. That's making him frantic." Rex had already texted Danny. 3 seconds later, he got a response. He read it and said, "Ryan stepped out of his car. He's on the sidewalk." Emma's breath shortened. "He's not coming in," Rex said. "Danny's between him and the door, and Danny is very large and very still, and Ryan's doing the math." Emma looked at Rex. "What if he stops doing math and just acts?" "Then we deal with it," Rex said. "But that's not his play in daylight with 9 witnesses. His play is pressure, text, making you feel crazy, making you feel like you're doing something wrong by sitting in a diner." He paused. "Is it working, huh?" Emma thought about this honestly. "A little," she admitted. "That's okay," Rex said. "It's supposed to work a little. It's been calibrated over 2 years to work on you specifically. The fact that you're still sitting here is extraordinary." She looked down at her coffee. Then her phone rang. Ryan's name lit up on the screen. The table was silent for 3 full seconds. Sarah said, "You decide." Emma looked at the phone. The ring was normal. Her regular ringtone, the one she hadn't changed since before Ryan because she'd liked it, and then somehow changing it had started to feel complicated in a way she couldn't explain. She looked at it and thought about every time she'd answered that call, every version of the conversation that followed, every variation of how it ended. She reached out. She turned the phone face down. She let it ring. The ringing stopped. Rex said nothing. Emma sat there for a moment breathing. Then she said, "In 8 months of saving $5 at a time, I think some part of me knew this day was coming. I just didn't know what it would look like." "What does it look like?" Rex asked. She thought about that. "Scary," she said, "and smaller than I expected. I thought there would be more drama, more screaming. I thought it would feel bigger." "That's the movies," Rex said. "In real life, it mostly looks like one person sitting across from another person and deciding something." Emma nodded slowly. Sarah had been writing steadily in her notebook. She looked up. "Okay, here's where we are. You have $400 and a safe account. You have a sister in Phoenix who will help. You have an exit road that doesn't go through Ryan's front door. You have a safe place to sleep tonight that he doesn't know about." She looked at Emma. "And you have something that's harder to quantify, but more important than any of that." "What?" Emma asked. "You have today," Sarah said. "You used that sign this morning. Someone saw it. And instead of going back to the truck, you stayed in your seat. That's not nothing, Emma. That's actually everything." Emma looked at the laminated table surface, at the small indentations in it from years of plates and mugs and elbows, at the coffee ring near the edge from a cup long gone. She said, "When I made that sign, I didn't actually think anyone would see it. I think I did it because I needed to do something, even if nothing happened. Just something." Rex said, "Your friend Dana told you about it years ago." "Yeah, and you remembered it. You kept it. Even after you stopped seeing her, even after he cut you off from everyone, you kept that one thing. Rex looked at her. That wasn't an accident. That was you holding on to a lifeline. Emma pressed her lips together hard. Outside, Ryan Mitchell stood on the sidewalk for 3 more minutes. Then he got back in his car. Danny texted Rex. Rex looked at his phone. He's driving away. The table was absolutely silent. Emma let out a breath she had been holding, it seemed, since July. Then she said, "Can I borrow someone's phone to call Maya?" Sarah already had the prepaid on the table. Emma looked at it. Her hand went out and then stopped. "What if she's at work?" "Then you leave a message," Sarah said. "What if she doesn't pick up a number she doesn't know?" "Then you call again," Rex said. Emma's hand closed around the phone. She dialed the number she'd had memorized since childhood, the number that had connected her to her sister through their parents' divorce, through high school, through college, through every hard thing that had come before Ryan, and the careful dismantling of everything she'd been. It rang twice. Then, "Hello," Maya's voice. Real and present and immediate, reaching across the 350 miles between Phoenix and Bakersfield, with the ease of a voice that had known Emma Carter her whole life. Emma's face did something complicated and undone. She said, "Maya, it's me." Her voice cracked on the last word. On the other end, a beat of silence. Then Maya said, "Emma, oh, thank God." And her voice had the sound of someone who had been waiting not for an hour or a day, but for months, maybe longer, for exactly this call. Emma started crying, not quietly this time, not the careful, controlled kind. She cried the way you cry when you've been holding something for so long that you've forgotten what it felt like not to hold it, and then suddenly the weight is gone. Rex looked at Lily. Lily looked at Rex. Neither of them said a word, and neither of them went anywhere. Maya didn't ask what happened. She didn't demand an explanation or a timeline, or any of the things Emma had been dreading in the half second between the phone connecting and her sister's voice coming through. She just said, "Oh, thank God." And then she listened, and listening was exactly the right thing. Emma talked for 11 minutes. She didn't plan. What she said, it came out the way things come out when you've been compressing them for too long and something finally gives. Not in order, not neatly. She said Ryan's name and then stopped and then started somewhere else and then circled back, and Maya didn't try to organize it or correct the sequence. She just stayed on the line and said, "I hear you," and keep going, and once very quietly, "I knew it, Em. I knew something was wrong." When Emma finally ran out of words, Maya said, "I'm booking a flight right now. Don't argue with me." Emma almost argued with her. She felt the old reflex rise up, the "I don't want to be a burden" reflex, the "I can handle this" reflex, the reflexes that Ryan had cultivated so carefully over 2 years. Because a woman who believed she could handle everything alone was a woman who wouldn't ask for help. She felt all of it, and then she looked across the table at Rex, who was watching her with the calm, patient expression of a man who had seen this exact moment before and knew what it required. And she said, "Okay, just that. Okay." Maya made a sound like someone releasing a breath they'd held for 3 months. "I'll text you my flight details on this number," she said. "Don't go back to the apartment alone. Promise me." "I promise," Emma said. "I love you." "I love you too." Emma's voice was rough. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner." "Don't," Maya said. "We're not doing that. Not today." Emma ended the call and set the prepaid phone on the table. She sat with what she'd just done for a moment, the way you sit with something after you've done it, and your body is catching up to the decision your mind already made. Sarah was already writing. Phoenix to Bakersfield is about an hour's flight. She'll be here tonight. She didn't even know the number, Emma said. She picked up a call from a number she didn't know, and she said, "Thank God." "She was waiting," Rex said. Emma looked at him. "I left her waiting for 3 months." "She's still here," he said. That was the whole answer, and it was enough. Lily had drifted close enough to hear the end of the phone call. She wasn't pretending to be somewhere else anymore. The diner had cleared out somewhat. Don Reardon had paid and left an hour ago. The women in scrubs had come and gone, and right now there were only 2 other tables occupied, both far enough away and absorbed enough in their own conversations that the booth in the middle of the room had its own privacy. Lily refilled everyone's coffee and said, "My shift ends in 45 minutes. I'm not going anywhere." Emma looked at her. "You've been here this whole time." "That's my job," Lily said. "That's not your job." Lily shrugged. "Well, it's what I'm doing." Emma looked at her for a long moment with an expression that was trying to hold too many things at once. I don't even know your last name. Morgan, Lily said. Lily Morgan. And you're Emma Carter, and you made a sign that said you needed help, and I'm glad I was paying attention. She said it plainly without making it into a speech, and then she walked back to the counter because she had a practical instinct for not letting a moment collapse under its own weight. Sarah had been quiet during the exchange watching. Now she leaned forward. Emma, I need to talk to you about the next 12 hours. Emma straightened. Okay. Tonight you'll stay at the Clear Path house. It's a private address, Ryan doesn't have access to it, and we don't publish it anywhere. There are 2 other women there right now. You'll have your own room, your own space. It's not permanent housing, it's transitional, but for the next few days it's safe and it's clean, and nobody is going to come through that door who shouldn't be there. Emma nodded. Tomorrow we start the formal documentation process. That's voluntary, nothing happens that you don't agree to. But I want to put on record what you've told me today with your permission, and I want to connect you with a legal advocate who can walk you through your options. Sarah paused. Ryan having a friend on the force is something we know how to work around. It's not the obstacle it feels like. He's going to say I'm making it up, Emma said. He's going to say a lot of things, Sarah said. And we're going to make sure that there are enough documented facts that what he says doesn't have the weight he's used to it having. She closed her notebook. But here's what I need you to understand, and this is important, so I want you to really hear it. You are not going to fix the last 2 years in the next 2 days. This is not a sprint. There are going to be hard moments and setbacks and days where this all feels impossible. Emma said, I know. I know that this is what getting out looks like. Messy and scary and not clean. Emma looked at her directly. I've been thinking about it long enough. Sarah held her gaze. Then she said, good. That's the version of you I need. Rex's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and this time the change in his expression was different. Something sharpened, something that wasn't quite alarm, but was adjacent to it. He read the message twice. Emma said, what? It wasn't a question. She knew from his face. Rex turned the phone so she and Sarah could see the screen. It was a text from a number in his contacts listed as Marco. The message said, Ryan's at DeLuca's talking to Kevin Sloan. Been there 20 minutes. Kevin's a cop, Rex. Real one. They're not just friends. The table went quiet in a way that had weight to it. Emma's face had gone pale. Kevin Sloan, she said. He talked about Kevin Sloan all the time. Me and Kevin. He said Kevin was the kind of person you wanted in your corner. She looked at Rex. He's filing something, isn't he? Right now. We don't know that, Rex said. What else would he be doing? Sarah said carefully. Filing what? Specifically, he doesn't have anything to file. You haven't filed anything. You haven't made any accusation of any kind. Emma's mind was working fast. A wellness check. He could ask Kevin to do a wellness check. Say I'm not in my right mind. Say he's worried about me. Say the bikers. She stopped. He's going to say your people were harassing him in the parking lot. He's going to flip the entire thing. Rex said, let him try. You don't understand how good he is at this, Emma said, and her voice was sharp now, not with fear, exactly, but with the particular frustration of someone who has watched a specific machine operate at close range for long enough to know exactly how it works. He's been building this story for months, the version where I'm unstable. He told his golf friends that I'd been having anxiety issues. He told his mother I'd been having paranoid episodes. He has been laying the groundwork for this scenario, for the scenario where I do something like this for months, and he is walking into that bar right now and handing Kevin Sloan the first chapter of a story that ends with me looking crazy and him looking like a victim. She said it all in one breath and then stopped, and the table absorbed it. Sarah and Rex looked at each other. Sarah said, she's right about the strategy. Rex said, I know. He's smart, Sarah said. It wasn't an admiring statement. It was a tactical one, the kind of assessment you make about an opponent. Emma said, so what do we do? Rex said, we do what we were already doing and we do it faster. He picked up his phone and made a call. He didn't put it on speaker. He walked toward the back hallway again, and Emma watched him go and felt the anxiety in her chest rev up half a notch. Sarah said, look at me. Emma looked at her. This doesn't change today's plan, Sarah said. It adds an element, but it doesn't change the fundamental structure. Getting you safe is still the priority, and we are still doing that. He could get Kevin to come here, Emma said. A wellness check. What happens when a cop walks in and Ryan's been telling him I'm having a breakdown? Then I talked to the cop, Sarah said, without any particular alarm in her voice. I've done it before. ClearPath has documentation of its protocols, our staff qualifications, everything. A wellness check conducted by a trained officer when the person being checked is sitting in a diner eating scrambled eggs and talking coherently to a licensed support worker tends to resolve quickly. She paused. The thing Ryan is banking on is that you have no one, no advocate, no documentation, no witnesses. He hasn't caught up to this morning yet. Emma thought about that. An hour ago, she had walked into this diner with $400 in a secret account and a friend she hadn't called in 8 months. Now she had Sarah Williams across the table and Maya booking a flight from Phoenix and 9 motorcycles worth of witnesses to what Ryan had done in that parking lot and what he'd said when he came in through the side door. The arithmetic had changed. Rex came back from the hallway. He sat down and he said, Marco's going to sit near Ryan and Kevin, discreetly, just to hear if there's anything we need to know. Sarah nodded, then to Emma. Marco is trustworthy, Rex said. I was going to say one of Rex's people. That too, Rex said. Emma said, Is this legal, sitting near someone in a bar? Rex looked at her with something that in another context might have been amusement. Last I checked, sitting in a bar is still legal in California. Emma almost smiled. Then her old phone, the one with Ryan's tracking app sitting face up on the table, lit up. Not a text, not a call, a voicemail notification. He'd called while Emma was on the prepaid with Maya and left a message. All 3 of them looked at the phone. Sarah said, You don't have to listen to it. Emma reached out and picked up the phone. Emma, Sarah said. I need to hear it, Emma said. I need to know what he's saying. If he's already started a specific version of events, I need to know what that version is. Sarah and Rex exchanged a look. Sarah gave a small nod. Emma put the phone on speaker and played the voicemail. Ryan's voice came out of the small speaker, and even in that tinny, compressed format, it had the quality Emma knew that specific modulation he used when he was performing reasonableness. Calm, measured. The voice of a concerned boyfriend. Emma, honey, I'm worried about you. You're sitting in there with people you don't know, and I understand you need space. Sometimes I get that. I've been trying to be better about that. But these people, I don't know who they are or what they've told you. I've talked to Kevin, and he agrees that this looks like it might be one of your episodes. I'm not saying that to be cruel, babe. I'm saying it because I love you, and I know when you're not yourself. Just come outside and talk to me. That's all I'm asking. We can go home and we can talk this through, and nobody has to make this into something bigger than it is. I love you. Please call me back. The voicemail ended. The diner's ambient noise came back in the ceiling fans, the distant sound of the kitchen, the low conversation from the far table. Emma set the phone down. She said quietly, One of your episodes. Sarah said, Yes. I don't have episodes, Emma said. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it. I know, Sarah said. He's been telling Kevin Sloan I have episodes. He's probably been telling everyone, his mother, his friends, anyone who might have noticed something. Emma looked at her hands. He's been preparing this story for months, which means at some point months ago, he decided that this day might come, that I might try to leave, and he started building the narrative before I could. She looked up. That's premeditated. The words sat on the table between them. Rex said, Yes, it is. Sarah had her pen out. Can I record this conversation with your permission? Emma looked at her. Why? Because what you just described, the systematic narrative construction designed to preemptively discredit you in the event you sought help, is a documented pattern with a name and with legal implications. And you describing it calmly and coherently approximately 3 minutes after listening to the voicemail, that demonstrates it is important. Emma looked at the phone, at the voicemail still showing on the screen. She said, He used the word episode specifically. He did, Sarah said. That's not an accident, Emma said. He knows that word carries weight, that it implies something clinical. He chose that word deliberately. Yes, Sarah said. Emma said, record it. Sarah set her own phone on the table, opened a recording app, stated the date and time, and that she had Emma Carter's consent, and then said, "Tell me in your own words about the pattern you just described." Emma talked for 8 minutes. She talked about the Christmas visit with Maya and how Ryan had spent 3 days subtly positioning himself as the stable one, and Emma as the emotional one, correcting her small, misremembered details in front of Maya, and then explaining to Emma privately that he was just trying to help her remember things accurately. She talked about the conversation with Dr. Patel that she'd overheard the end of once, where Ryan had stopped by the clinic and she'd caught the words, "She gets overwhelmed easily," before she made enough noise that Ryan knew she was there and changed the subject. She talked about the night 6 months ago when she'd called her mother, who was in Ohio, who she spoke to rarely, and mentioned that things had been stressful, and how the next day Ryan had sat her down and said with that same measured concern, "I got a call from your mom. She's worried about you. I told her you'd been having a hard time managing your anxiety. I hope that was okay." She had not called her mother and said anything about stress. Ryan had, without telling her, shaping the narrative with the people who loved her before she could get there. When she finished, Sarah stopped the recording and the table was very quiet. Rex said, "You have an excellent memory." "I remembered all of it," Emma said, "because I kept trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I kept going back through everything, cataloging everything, looking for proof of the thing he kept saying I was. And instead I found evidence of him." She paused. "All that time I spent examining myself, and I was actually building a case." Sarah looked at her for a moment with an expression that wasn't quite professional anymore. "You know," she said, "in 11 years of doing this work, I've had this conversation maybe 1,000 times. And what you just did, the clarity, the specificity, the connection between events, that's not common. Most people in your position are still too deep in the fog." Emma said, "The fog started lifting when I sat down with Rex." Rex shook his head. "The fog started lifting when you made that sign." Emma's phone lit up again. A text from Ryan this time. "Did you listen to my voicemail? I need you to call me back right now, Emma. Kevin is concerned." And then 15 seconds later, a second text. "I'm serious. If you don't respond in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to ask Kevin to come by the diner just to make sure you're okay. This isn't a threat. It's because I care about you." Emma read both texts, then she set the phone face down. 10 minutes, she said. "Yes," Sarah said. "Are we ready for that?" "For a cop coming in?" Rex said. "Marco just texted. Ryan and Kevin Sloan talked for about 25 minutes. Kevin left the bar 5 minutes ago." Emma said, "He's already on his way." Rex nodded. Sarah closed her notebook. She looked at Emma with that direct, steady look that had characterized everything she'd done since she walked in. "Here's what you need to know. When Officer Sloan comes in, you are coherent, you are calm, and you are exactly what you are: a woman who sought help in a public place and is now in a conversation with a licensed professional support worker. That's not a wellness emergency. That's a Tuesday." Emma almost laughed. "You don't have to answer his questions," Sarah continued. "You don't have to explain yourself to him. If he asked if you're all right, you say yes. If he asked if you wanted to go home with Ryan, you say no. If he starts pushing you, walk at me." She paused. "And Rex?" Rex was already texting. Emma said, "What are you doing?" "Texting Danny," he said, "and a couple other people." 2 minutes later, the door of the diner opened. Officer Kevin Sloan was in his early 40s in uniform, and he had the particular body language of someone who had been asked to do something he'd framed to himself as a favor and wanted to get it done quickly. He looked around the diner, spotted Emma, and walked over with the measured pace of someone trying to look unhurried. He was 3 steps from the table when he registered Rex. He stopped. Rex Callahan looked back at him with absolute, complete, untroubled calm. Kevin Sloan knew who Rex Callahan was. This was visible in the way his posture adjusted, the way his professionally neutral expression did a brief, complicated thing before it settled back into professional neutrality. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes," Emma said. "Officer Kevin Sloan. Someone asked me to check in on you, make sure you're doing okay." "I'm fine," Emma said. "I'm having coffee with my support worker." She nodded at Sarah. Kevin looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Kevin. She said pleasantly, "Sarah Williams, Clear Path Advocacy. How can I help you?" Officer Kevin Sloan had done the math on the room in about 4 seconds and was clearly not thrilled with the sum. "I just wanted to make sure Miss Carter was here of her own free will," he said. Emma said. That nobody was pressuring her to. Nobody is pressuring me, Emma said. I came in for coffee. I met these people. I'm having a conversation. She paused and something in her had changed since the voicemail, since the recorded testimony, since the 8 minutes of clear, detailed, damning narrative she'd just laid out. There was a composure in her that hadn't been there an hour ago. Is there something specific I can help you with? Officer, Kevin Sloan looked at her for a moment, then at Sarah, then at Rex. Rex said in the same tone he'd used all morning, the tone that was conversational and entirely immovable. Good to see you, Kevin. Kevin Sloan cleared his throat. You too, Rex. The awkwardness in the diner was thick enough to cut. Kevin said to Emma, if you need anything, any assistance of any kind, you can call the station. Thank you, Emma said. He gave one more look around the table. Then he turned and walked back toward the door, moving a little faster than he'd come in. The door closed behind him. Lily behind the counter let out a breath that she had apparently been holding since Kevin walked in. She looked at Rex. Rex gave a barely perceptible nod. Emma said, he's going straight to Ryan. Of course, Rex said. And he's going to tell Ryan that that I seemed fine. That's the problem Ryan is about to have, Sarah said. He set up a wellness check on a woman who turned out to be sitting in a diner having a coherent conversation with a licensed support worker and one of the most recognized community figures in this county. She paused. That's not the story he wanted Kevin to come back with. Emma thought about that. Then Rex's phone lit up with a message from Marco. He read it, and his jaw tightened in a way Emma was learning to read. What? She said. Rex said, Ryan's back at DeLuca's. He's making calls. Who is he calling? Marco doesn't know yet, but he's been on the phone for the last 10 minutes, and he doesn't look happy. Sarah said, it's starting. Emma looked at her. What's starting? The part where he decides that charm and wellness checks aren't enough, Sarah said. The part where he switches strategies. She looked at Emma steadily. This is the part I need you to be prepared for, because the next move is usually the one that feels most dangerous. He's going to try to make this about him. Emma said, what does that look like? Sarah said, it looks like the victim becoming the perpetrator. It looks like him filing something first, a harassment complaint, a restraining order application, which sounds insane, but it happens. It looks like him going to people in this town and telling them that you've accused him of things, that his girlfriend had some kind of breakdown and a group of bikers got involved, that he's the one being harassed and threatened. Emma absorbed this. He would actually do that. He would absolutely do that, Sarah said, because it's a race. Whoever establishes the narrative first has the advantage. He knows that, and he is sitting in that bar right now making calls because he's realized he's losing the race. Emma said, so we run faster. Sarah looked at her. What do we need to do, Emma said, right now today? What's the fastest legitimate move we can make to establish the actual narrative? Sarah said, documentation, the recording I just made, your account formal and written with a timestamp, evidence, whatever evidence exists, starting with the voicemail he just left you, which is preserved on your phone right now. Emma picked up the old phone, the voicemail. The voicemail where he references your episodes and mentions that he's spoken to Kevin Sloan, Sarah said. That voicemail in combination with the text messages from this morning, in combination with your recorded account, that's a body of contemporaneous evidence that tells a very clear story. Emma looked at the phone. How do I preserve it? Sarah already had a cable out of her bag. We back it up right now to a secure cloud account he doesn't have access to. Every text, every voicemail, everything on that phone from the last 6 months. She paused. Do I have your permission? Yes, Emma said, and handed the phone across the table without hesitation. The next 15 minutes were logistical. Sarah working through Emma's phone with practiced efficiency, moving through screens and functions with the fluency of someone who had done this specific task dozens of times. Emma watching with the focused attention of someone who was understanding for the first time that the tools of documentation that had always seemed out of reach were actually just sitting there waiting for someone to show her how to use them. Rex sat quietly. He drank his coffee. He watched the room. He was the one who saw it first, not Ryan, not Kevin Sloan. A woman early 60s who pushed through the diner's front door with the particular energy of someone on a mission. She was solid-built, wearing a house dress, and she looked around the diner with eyes that were moving fast and sharp. Rex said, "Emma." Emma looked up from the phone. The woman had found her. She walked straight to the booth and stood at the edge of the table looking at Emma, with an expression that was complicated and fierce and had something in it that might have been relief. "Mija," she said. Emma stared. Mrs. Garza, her neighbor, the 70-year-old woman from the unit next door who had looked at her the morning after the lamp and said, "Are you all right?" Mrs. Garza said, "I saw his truck leave this morning, early, and I saw you leave with him, and I have been watching that parking lot since he came back without you." She sat down at the edge of the booth, uninvited, pulling a chair from a nearby table and placing it at the end. "I took a taxi." Emma said, "Mrs. Garza, how did you know I was here?" "I didn't," she said. "I walked to 3 diners. This was the second one." She looked at Rex, then Sarah, then back at Emma. "Are these people helping you?" "Yes," Emma said. Mrs. Garza nodded once decisively. Then she said, "Good, because I have been waiting for this day for 8 months, and I have things to say." She looked at Sarah. "You write things down." Sarah's pen was already out. "Yes, ma'am," Mrs. Garza said. "I have thin walls." She said it simply without drama, and what followed was not dramatic either. It was matter-of-fact and detailed and devastating. 8 months of thin walls, voices, objects. The specific night the lamp broke, she knew the date. She'd written it down, she said, because she had a feeling it would matter someday. The morning she'd seen Emma's arm in the hallway and then watched Emma pull her sleeve down. The afternoon she'd heard Ryan on his phone in the unit, voice low and controlled, telling someone his mother, Mrs. Garza, thought that Emma had been struggling, that he was very patient with her, that he worried about her stability. She had written all of it down. She reached into the pocket of her house dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Then another. 4 sheets covered in small, neat handwriting, dated entries going back 8 months. She set them on the table in front of Sarah. Emma looked at the papers, then at Mrs. Garza. Her throat was working. Mrs. Garza looked at her with the direct, steady gaze of a woman who had lived through enough of her own hardship to recognize someone else's without needing it, explained. "I should have knocked on your door," she said. "I thought about it many times. I was afraid of making it worse for you." Emma said, "It wouldn't have been worse." "I know that now," Mrs. Garza said. "That is why I am here." Sarah was reading the handwritten pages. Rex was reading over her shoulder, and Emma watched Rex's face change as he read, not dramatically, not with any performance of emotion, but a slow, incremental tightening that she'd learned by now meant he was taking in something that mattered. Sarah looked up. "Mrs. Garza, are you willing to give a formal statement?" Mrs. Garza said, "I took a taxi to get here. What do you think?" Sarah said, "I think you're exactly what today needed." Rex's phone buzzed. He read the message and looked up at Emma with an expression that told her before he said a word that the story had just shifted again. Emma said, "What?" Rex said, "Marco. Ryan's been on the phone this whole time. He's been talking to a lawyer." The table went quiet. Then Sarah said quietly but with clarity, "Of course he has." Emma looked at the handwritten pages still spread on the table. 8 months of Mrs. Garza's careful, dated, witnessed record. The backed-up phone sitting next to Sarah's recording device. Maya's flight already booked, already somewhere over the California border, on its way to land. The voicemail with Ryan's voice saying one of your episodes preserved and time-stamped. She looked at Rex. She said, "He thinks he's winning." Rex said, "He thought that before you walked in here this morning." Emma picked up her coffee mug. It was almost empty. Lily was there in 10 seconds. She poured without a word and walked away. Emma watched her go. Then she set the mug down and looked at Sarah and Mrs. Garza and Rex, 3 people who had shown up for her today, without being owed anything, without any obligation except the one that decent people feel when they see something wrong happening to another person and decide that looking away is not an option. She thought about the sign she'd made on the table, the small gesture that was supposed to be a last resort and turned out to be a beginning. Ryan Mitchell was sitting in a bar talking to a lawyer, convinced he was building a wall fast enough to stop what was coming. He had not yet understood what was coming. Emma Carter had spent 8 months building a case without knowing she was building one. She had a recorded testimony. She had documented evidence. She had a neighbor with 8 months of handwritten notes. She had a sister on a plane. She had a support worker with 11 years of experience and a licensed advocacy program behind her. She had a man who had made a promise to a dead woman 22 years ago and had never broken it, and she had the voicemail. Ryan's own voice measured and calculating, saying one of your episodes, saying Kevin agrees, saying I'm just trying to help you, the architecture of a lie preserved in digital audio available on demand. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. Sarah said, ready to keep going. Emma said, yeah, she was. It looks like you're requesting part 4 next in the sequence. Let me write that now. Part 4 picks up directly from where part 3 ended. Emma steady at the table, Ryan escalating through a lawyer Maya in the air, and the full weight of what's been built starting to move. The lawyer's name came through Marco 20 minutes later. Not a rumor. A name, Greg Hollister's civil practice out of downtown Bakersfield, known locally for handling disputes that required a certain flexibility of moral imagination. Rex knew the name the way you know names in a mid-sized city after 30 years, not personally, not with history, just the way certain names accumulate, a reputation that travels ahead of them through the right circles. He said the name to Sarah. Sarah's pen stopped moving. You know him, Rex said. I know his work, Sarah said. He filed a counter-injunction against one of my clients 2 years ago. Woman named Patricia, she'd been documenting abuse for 14 months, had medical records, had photographs, had 2 witnesses. Hollister filed first, claimed she was conducting a harassment campaign. Sarah's voice stayed even, but Emma, watching her, could see something tighten in her jaw. It delayed her case by 7 months. Emma said, did she eventually... She's in Denver now, Sarah said. New job. Her daughter's in a good school. She paused. But it cost her 7 months she didn't have. Emma looked at the table. 7 months was a long time to be in the place she'd been in. Rex said, what does Hollister filing first look like practically? Sarah said, it looks like Ryan walking into a courthouse before we do and establishing himself as the aggrieved party, harassment, emotional distress, possible defamation if he can argue Emma said anything to third parties that damaged his reputation. She looked at Emma. Have you said anything to anyone in Bakersfield before today? Emma shook her head. I didn't have anyone to say anything to. Sarah nodded. Okay, that's actually useful. Anything he files will be based on today, and today has witnesses in a timeline that he's not going to love. She tapped the stack of Mrs. Garza's handwritten pages. This changes things considerably. Mrs. Garza, still sitting at the end of the table, said, he cannot file something about today without explaining why he was in a parking lot watching the diner for an hour. Rex looked at her. She looked back at him, perfectly calm. She's right, Rex said. Sarah said, she's completely right. A pause. Mrs. Garza, have you ever testified in any kind of legal proceeding before? Mrs. Garza said, I testified in a property dispute in 1987 and a custody hearing in 2003. I am not afraid of being in a room and saying true things. Sarah said, good, because true things said by credible witnesses in the right sequence have a way of making Greg Hollister's filings look exactly like what they are. Emma was listening to all of this with the focused, slightly detached attention of someone managing a high volume of information while simultaneously managing fear. She was doing it well. She knew she was doing it well, and she knew it wouldn't last, that at some point, maybe today, maybe tonight, the adrenaline would run out and everything she'd been holding up would get very heavy. But right now, it was still running. Tell me what we file, she said. Sarah looked at her. Today? As fast as possible, Emma said. You said it's a race, so tell me how we run. Sarah said, an emergency protective order is the first move. It establishes legal distance, and it goes on record with a timestamp. Given the voicemail, the text messages, and an independent witness account of ongoing conduct, we have enough for a judge to grant a temporary order today. Emma said, a restraining order. A temporary protective order. It becomes a restraining order at a hearing which happens within 21 days. But the temporary order is effective immediately, and it establishes the timeline. It puts your account into the legal record before Hollister can get Ryan in front of a judge with his version. Emma said, okay, what do I have to do? Sarah said, sign a declaration. Tell the truth. The declaration gets filed with the evidence. We have the voicemail, the text, Mrs. Garza's notes. She paused. I have a legal advocate I can have on the phone in 10 minutes. Her name is Veronica Chen. She can guide you through the declaration and coordinate the filing. Emma said, call her. Sarah was already dialing. Rex sat back and let it run. This was the part of the process that wasn't his. The paperwork, the filings, the legal architecture that turned lived experience into documented fact. His job had been this morning. The coffee and the listening in the parking lot, the part that made the rest possible. He watched Emma across the table, watched her talk to Veronica Chen. When Sarah handed her the phone, watched her answer questions in the same clear, sequential way she'd given the recorded statement, precise, grounded, specific. He thought about Carol. He thought about her the way he thought about her most often now. Not with the gutting, disabling grief of the first years, but with the particular sadness of someone who has made peace with a loss without ever being able to call it okay. He thought about what Carol would have done with this morning, whether she would have made the sign, whether she would have stayed in her seat. He thought she would have. He'd just never been the person paying attention. Mrs. Garza had pulled a small photograph from her purse. Emma couldn't see it from her angle and was showing it to Rex. He took it carefully, looked at it for a long moment, and said something to Mrs. Garza in a low voice that Emma couldn't hear. When Emma got off the phone with Veronica Chen, she said, she needs 3 things from me, and she can have the filing to a judge by 4 o'clock. Sarah said, can you give her the 3 things? Yes. Emma looked at Rex and Mrs. Garza. What is that? What are you looking at? Rex held the photograph up. It was a photo of the hallway outside Emma's apartment, the wall. Emma stared at it for a moment before she understood what she was seeing, a section of the hallway wall at an angle that showed faintly but clearly a dark impact mark at about shoulder height. And below it on the floor, a scatter of what might have been, if you knew what you were looking at, fragments of colored ceramic. The lamp, Emma said. The hallway wall, Mrs. Garza said. The lamp hit the wall hard enough that a piece came through the door gap and landed in the hall. I took a photograph that morning before either of you were awake. Emma looked at the photograph for a long time. She said, you took this photograph the morning after it happened. I have had it on my phone since then, Mrs. Garza said. I did not know what to do with it. I was afraid to make things worse, so I kept it. She paused. I kept it because I thought someday you would need it. The diner around them had cycled through another shift of customers and back. The July heat pressed against the windows. The ceiling fans turned. Lily had been replaced behind the counter by an afternoon server named Greg, who had so far minded his own business with admirable professionalism. Emma looked at Mrs. Garza with something in her face that was beyond gratitude, that was more complex than gratitude. The particular emotion of discovering that someone had been watching out for you during a period when you believed had been methodically taught to believe that nobody was watching. She said, I didn't know. Mrs. Garza said, you were not supposed to know. That was the point. Emma pressed her hand briefly to her mouth, held it there for a second, then took it away. Okay, she said, her voice was steady. Send that to Veronica Chen, right now, today. Mrs. Garza already had her phone out. Rex's phone buzzed. Marco. Rex read it, and this time his expression did something Emma hadn't seen it do all day. It went briefly, genuinely still. The kind of still that precedes something significant. He said Ryan left the bar. Sarah looked up from her notes. Headed where Rex said home, the apartment. Emma's breath shortened. He's going back to clean it up. Like I said. Rex said yes. Emma said, the marks on the wall inside the apartment. There are marks on the wall inside too, not just in the hallway. The lamp hit the hallway wall, but first it hit the living room wall, and there's a place where the paint is chipped, and there's a place on the door frame where... She stopped. If he gets there and deals with it before anyone can document it... Sarah was already talking to Veronica Chen, who was apparently still on the line relaying what Rex had said. Emma heard the word exigent, and then Sarah's voice dropped lower. Rex said Marco's following him. Emma said, what can Marco do? Rex said, right now, just watch, document. He's got a dash cam and his phone. He paused. The inside of the apartment is Ryan's leased space. We can't go in there. Emma's jaw tightened. Then she said, I can. Everyone at the table looked at her. It's my home, she said. My things are in there, my documents, my birth certificate, my social security card, my passport, All of it is in that apartment. I have a right to go in. Sarah said carefully, you do. But going there right now before any protective order is in place with Ryan, possibly already on his way. He just left the bar, Emma said. Marco is following him. How far is the apartment? Rex said 7 minutes. Emma said, how fast can I get there? Rex looked at her. She looked back at him, and he could see it, the thing that had been building all morning, the shift from someone managing fear to someone channeling it. She wasn't reckless. She was calculating. He'd watched this happen before, the moment when the survival instinct that had been running underneath everything rose to the surface and started moving in a direction. He said, you don't go alone. No, she said. And you go in, get what you need, and get out. 5 minutes maximum. 5 minutes, she agreed. Sarah said, Rex, a warning in her voice. Rex said, Marco can text us the second Ryan's car turns onto the block. That gives us the window. He looked at Sarah. If she doesn't get those documents today, Hollister can use their absence to complicate the protective order filing. Her ID, her financial records, her personal property, she needs those. Sarah said, if Ryan arrives while she's in that apartment, he won't, Rex said. He picked up his phone and typed rapidly. Danny's outside. He'll drive her. I'll be right behind. Marco texts the second Ryan's car moves. Emma was already standing. Sarah said, Emma. Firm, not stopping her, but requiring her attention. Emma looked at her. Sarah said, you go in, you get the documents, you come straight out. You do not engage with Ryan if he arrives. You do not argue, you do not explain. You do not try to have the conversation you deserve to have in a 5-minute window in that apartment. You get what's yours and you come out. Understood. Emma said, understood. Sarah said, I will have Veronica fast-tracking the protective order filing from here. By the time you get back, we should have a hearing time. Emma said, okay. She looked at Mrs. Garza. Mrs. Garza said, go. I will still be here. Something in Emma wanted to hug the woman, this neighbor she'd stopped talking to in the hallway, this quiet, watchful presence who had been keeping a record with careful, dated handwriting, while Emma was somewhere inside the apartment, trying to understand how her life had taken the shape it had. She wanted to say something adequate. She couldn't find anything adequate. She said, thank you. Mrs. Garza waved a hand. Go before he gets there. Emma went. Danny was leaning against a motorcycle outside, and the transition from the diner's air-conditioned interior to the Bakersfield July heat was like walking into a wall. He was the red-bearded man, large and solid, and he looked at Emma with a directness that was not unfriendly. You need to go somewhere fast. Yes, she said, get on. She'd never been on a motorcycle. The thought arrived and then passed. There were larger things happening, and her body had already made the decision. She got on behind Danny, and he pulled into traffic with the smooth, practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for decades. Rex was 3 seconds behind them on his own bike. Emma felt the wind and the speed and the heat, and she thought about the apartment, the specific layout of it, the drawer in the bedroom where she kept her documents in a manila envelope, the small amount of cash she'd hidden in a coffee can in the back of a high shelf in the kitchen. She thought about her winter coat hanging in the closet that her grandmother had given her. She thought about a small framed photograph of her and Maya at a lake taken 10 years ago that she'd kept in the bedroom nightstand because Ryan had never cared about that drawer. She thought about what she was not going to take, every piece of furniture that Ryan had picked, every dish that was part of a set he'd bought, every object that had been slowly and gradually replaced by his taste until her own had become invisible. She was not going to take any of that. She wanted almost none of it. She wanted her grandmother's coat and a photograph of her sister at a lake. Marco's text came through to Rex with 3 minutes to spare. Ryan's car was still on the far side of town. Caught in traffic near the bar, Marco said because of a light that had gone red twice at the intersection. Danny pulled up outside the apartment building. Rex was right behind him. Emma was off the bike and moving before Danny had fully stopped. She had her key. She'd had it in her pocket all morning. The key she'd carried every day for 2 years. The key to the place she'd tried to think of as home. Rex was at her shoulder when she went in. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning. She'd made the bed out of habit the way she always did, another thing Orion had trained her to do without being able to point to exactly when or how. She went directly to the bedroom without looking at the living room. The manila envelope was in the drawer right where she'd kept it. She took it without looking inside. She'd check later. Right now, she just needed it in her hand. She went to the kitchen. The coffee can was on the high shelf. She pulled a chair over and got it down. $50 inside, not the full amount. She'd moved the rest to the account gradually, but $50 and under the cash. A folded note that she'd written to herself 8 months ago when she'd opened the secret account. She'd forgotten about the note. She unfolded it quickly, standing on the kitchen chair. It said in her own handwriting, "You are not crazy. You are not making it up. You are not too sensitive. Get out." She stared at it. Rex from the doorway said, "2 minutes." She folded the note and put it in her pocket. She got the grandmother's coat from the closet. She got the photograph from the nightstand drawer. She stood in the bedroom for 3 seconds and looked at it, at the made bed, and the curtains Ryan had picked, and the lamp on his side of the room that matched the one he'd thrown the replacement, neat and identical, as if nothing had ever happened. She said goodbye to nothing in particular, not to the apartment, not to the version of herself who had lived in it. She just stood there for 3 seconds and let the goodbye happen without naming it. Then she left. Rex was outside the bedroom door. She walked past him toward the front door. He followed. They were out of the building in 90 seconds. Danny was waiting. Rex looked at his phone. Marco said Ryan's car had cleared the intersection and was moving. "Go," Rex said. Emma got back on the motorcycle. She had the envelope and the coat and the photograph and the $50 and the note she'd written to herself 8 months ago. She had everything that was actually hers. They were 4 blocks away when Marco texted that Ryan's car had pulled into the building parking lot. Emma didn't look back. There was nothing to look at. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, on the back of Danny's red-bearded head, on the way Bakersfield moved around her at speed, the buildings and the heat and the afternoon light, and the life of a city that had existed all this time while she'd been trapped inside one apartment, trying to understand what was wrong with her. Nothing was wrong with her. She'd written it to herself 8 months ago, and she'd been right. By the time they got back to the diner, Sarah had a text from Veronica Chen. The declaration was drafted. A judge had agreed to review the emergency filing by 4:30, and with the evidence package they were submitting, Veronica's assessment was that the temporary protective order would be granted before end of business. Emma sat back down in the booth. She put the envelope and the coat and the photograph on the seat beside her. She put the note on the table. "You are not crazy. You are not making it up. You are not too sensitive. Get out." Lilo came by, saw the note, said nothing, and poured coffee. Rex sat across from Emma and looked at the note. He said, "You wrote that to yourself." 8 months ago, she said. "Smart woman," he said. Emma looked at the note. "I didn't feel smart. I felt like I was writing a reminder because I was afraid I'd forget." "People forget when they're in it," Rex said. "That's the whole point of what he does, make you forget what's true. You kept the truth in a coffee can on a high shelf." He paused. "That's not nothing." Sarah was on the phone with Veronica. Mrs. Garza was eating a piece of pie that Lily had brought without being asked. Outside, Danny had pulled up a chair in the shade and was doing something on his phone that probably involved checking in with the others still positioned around the building. Emma looked at the photograph of her and Maya at the lake. They were both laughing. She didn't remember why. She remembered the lake, remembered the summer, but not the specific thing that had made them laugh. Just that they had. Just that they were both young and the water was behind them, and whatever had been funny was funny enough that neither of them had bothered to compose their faces for the camera. She didn't look like the woman in long sleeves who had walked into this diner this morning. She looked like someone who laughed at things. Her phone, the prepaid, buzzed with a text from an Arizona number. Maya. Landed early, apparently. The text said, "Sitting on the tarmac. Don't go anywhere without me. Also, I bought you a burrito from the airport, which will probably be terrible by the time I get there, but I bought it." Emma's whole face did something complicated and warm and completely involuntary. She texted back, "I'm at the diner. I'll still be here. Come find me." Maya's response was immediate. "I know exactly how to find you. Rex's people have a hell of a parking lot presence." Emma started laughing. It came out fully this time, not the small, surprised laugh from earlier, not the helpless half laugh, but a real one, the kind that takes up space. It made Lily look over from across the room. It made Mrs. Garza smile without looking up from her pie. It made Rex, who had seen a lot of things in 30 years, look at this 29-year-old woman in a middle booth and feel something he would never have found the words for, but that Carol would have recognized immediately. It was the sound of someone coming back. Rex's phone rang. He looked at it, and something in his face went sharply quiet. He stood up. He walked to the back hallway. Emma watched him go. She watched the way he moved, and she'd learned enough about Rex Callahan today to know that the way he moved right now was different. Not alarmed, not panicked, but operating at a different frequency. He was back in 3 minutes. He sat down. Sarah looked at him. Emma looked at him. He said, "That was Kevin Sloan." The table went quiet. Emma said, "What did he want?" Rex said, "He wanted to talk to me directly, without Ryan on the line." He paused. "He said he owes me a conversation." Sarah said, "What kind of conversation?" Rex looked at Emma. "The kind where a cop who grew up with someone tells a friend of that cop's girlfriend that he's starting to think his buddy might not be who he thought he was." Emma said, "Kevin Sloan is talking to you." "Calling me," Rex corrected, "which is different. I didn't call him, he called me to, which means something shifted on his end." Sarah said, "What shifted?" Rex said, "He went to the apartment after he left here. He said Ryan asked him to come over, said he needed to talk. Kevin said Ryan was..." Rex paused. He said Ryan was composing. Emma said composing. Rex said calm, controlled, telling Kevin a very organized story about what had happened this morning. Everything in order, everything explained, everything having an interpretation that positioned Ryan as the victim. He looked at Emma. Kevin's known Ryan since they were 19, and he said that when Ryan gets like that, when everything is too organized, too calm, too already explained, that's when Kevin gets a bad feeling in his stomach. Emma said Kevin Sloan has a bad feeling about Ryan. Rex said he called me to ask what I knew. The table held this for a moment. Sarah said, "What did you tell him?" Rex said, "I told him the truth was at the diner and it had documentation and it would be filed with a judge by 4:30. He looked at Emma. "And I told him that if he wanted to hear the truth directly, he should come here." Emma said, "You invited Kevin Sloan to come here." "I told him the truth was available if he wanted it," Rex said. "That's not the same as an invitation. It's a door. What he does with the door is his business." Emma looked at Rex for a long moment. She said, "You don't do anything without a reason." Rex said, "Kevin Sloan on our side of this, even neutrally, even just not actively on Ryan's side, changes the practical landscape considerably. Hollister is going to try to file. A cop with first-hand impressions, first-hand doubts, first-hand knowledge of Ryan's behavior is a resource." Emma said, "You think Kevin might actually help?" Rex said, "I think Kevin Sloan called me from Ryan's apartment parking lot on his personal phone, not his work phone, and I think that means something." Sarah said, "If he comes in here, I'll handle it," Emma said. Everyone looked at her. She said it again more quietly. "I'll handle it. I'm not afraid of talking to Kevin Sloan." She paused. "Ryan spent months making me afraid of Kevin Sloan. Told me Kevin was the kind of person who could make my life very difficult if I said the wrong things. Used Kevin's name like a threat." She looked at the table. "If Kevin is actually a decent person who's starting to see what Ryan is, then I want to be the one in the room when that happens." Rex looked at her with an expression that was for the first time all day, something very close to straightforwardly proud. Sarah said, "All right, but I'm here." "I know," Emma said, "and you're always here." It was the most casual thing she'd said all day, and she said it without thinking. And then she heard herself say it and understood that she meant it, that in 5 hours she'd gone from a woman who believed she had nobody to a woman who said you're always here about a person she'd met before lunch. She thought about what Rex had said this morning. You don't decide it alone. Outside Bakersfield went about its Tuesday afternoon in the July heat. Inside the diner, a 29-year-old woman sat at a middle booth with a manila envelope full of documents and a grandmother's coat on the seat beside her, and a note she'd written to herself and a photograph of her sister at a lake, and she waited for the next thing to come. She wasn't afraid of the next thing. That was new. That was everything. Kevin Sloan walked through the front door of the diner at 3:47 in the afternoon. He was out of uniform now. That was the first thing Emma noticed. He had changed out of his patrol gear into jeans and a gray t-shirt, which meant he'd gone home between Ryan's apartment and here, which meant he'd made a deliberate choice about how he wanted to walk into this room. Not as a cop, as a person. Emma noticed that, filed it. He stood inside the door for a moment and looked around the diner, the way he probably looked around every room he entered, old habit occupational, And then his eyes landed on the middle booth, and he walked over. Rex stood up when Kevin reached the table. Not aggressively, just stood the way a man stands when he's establishing the basic terms of an interaction. They were roughly the same height. Rex was broader. Kevin had the particular physical quality of someone who stayed in shape as a professional requirement. And he looked at Rex with an expression that was complicated, not hostile, not easy, something in between, that had the texture of a man working through something in real time. Rex, he said. Kevin, Rex said. You know Sarah Williams. Kevin looked at Sarah. By reputation, he said. Good reputation, I hope, Sarah said. Kevin didn't answer that. He looked at Emma. Emma looked back at him. She had spent months being afraid of Kevin Sloan in the abstract, afraid of what Ryan said he could do, afraid of the weight his name carried in Ryan's stories, afraid of the version of Kevin that existed in Ryan's narrative as an immovable obstacle between Emma and anyone believing her. That Kevin Sloan was a weapon, a warning, a door that was permanently closed. The actual Kevin Sloan was a 43-year-old man in a gray t-shirt who looked like he hadn't slept well and was carrying something he hadn't figured out how to put down yet. He said, "Can I sit?" Emma said. "It's a public diner." He sat, not across from her. He took the chair Mrs. Garza had pulled from the neighboring table, the one at the end of the booth, so that he wasn't directly opposite anyone. A conscious positioning, Emma thought. Neutral ground. He said, "I owe you an apology." Emma had not expected that. She kept her face level. "Okay. I came in here this morning to do Ryan a favor," Kevin said. "I want to be straight about that. He told me you'd been having a rough time, that you'd gotten mixed up with some people he didn't know, that he was worried. He asked me to come check on you, and I came." He stopped. "I didn't ask enough questions before I came." Sarah said, "What questions are you asking now?" Kevin looked at her. "I went back to his apartment after I was here. Ryan asked me to come, and I went because I've known him since we were 19. And that's a long time," and he paused. And he started talking, telling me the whole story. His version, very organized, very calm, everything having an explanation. Emma said, "Yes, he does that." Kevin looked at her. "How long has he been doing it?" "Organizing things," Emma said. "The whole time. But the version he tells other people, he's been building that for months. Since before he probably knew he was building it." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "He told me you had anxiety episodes, that you'd been seeing a therapist and it wasn't going well, that you'd become paranoid and confrontational, and that he'd been trying to get you help, but you refused." He said it flatly, recounting, not editorializing. Emma listened to the list of things Ryan had told Kevin Sloan and felt a familiar sensation, not quite anger, not quite grief, more like the specific exhaustion of hearing someone else's fictional version of your life stated out loud. She said, "I don't have a therapist. I've never had a therapist. Not because I'm against it. I'd probably benefit from one right now, but because Ryan told me 8 months ago that therapists just convince women to blame their problems on their partners. And She stopped, heard herself. "I listened to him. That's the honest answer." Kevin said, "He showed me texts from you to him. They looked concerning." Emma said, "What did they say?" Kevin hesitated. Sarah said, "You can tell her she wrote them." Kevin pulled out his phone. He turned it toward Emma. Emma read the text, her name on the screen, her contact messages sent from her number to Ryan's. She read them once, then again more slowly. Then she looked up. "I didn't write those." Kevin said, "I know they're from your number." "I understand that," Emma said. "I'm telling you I did not write them. I've never sent Ryan a message that said I was afraid of myself. I've never used the phrase my episodes. I don't think in those words. Those words are Ryan's words." She paused. "He has had access to my phone since 6 months into our relationship. He knows my passcode. He has had access to my phone every night while I was sleeping." The table was very quiet. Kevin looked at the texts, then at Emma. He was doing something with his face that wasn't quite belief and wasn't quite disbelief. It was the expression of a man whose understanding of a situation is shifting in real time and who is disciplined enough to let the shift happen rather than forcing it to stop. Rex said, "Kevin." Kevin looked at him. Rex said, "I'm going to ask you something directly and I need a direct answer." Kevin said, "Go ahead." Rex said, In 19 years of friendship with Ryan Mitchell, have you ever seen him do something that made you uncomfortable? Something you explained to Warren or told yourself wasn't what it looked like? A long pause. Kevin's jaw worked slightly. He looked at the table. He said, once. Sarah didn't move. Emma didn't move. Rex waited. Kevin said, about 3 years ago, before Emma, he was with a woman named Carla. They dated maybe 8 months. I met her twice once when they were together happy. She seemed fine. The second time was at the end, after they broke up. I ran into her at a gas station. He stopped. She looked like she'd been through something. I asked if she was okay. She said yes. I said, are you sure? She looked at me for a second and then she said, did Ryan tell you I was having problems? And I said he'd mentioned she'd been struggling, and she just nodded. Kevin looked at his hands. She said, yeah, that's what he'd say. And she got in her car and drove away. Emma said softly, Carla. Kevin looked at her. He told me about her, Emma said. He said she'd been unstable, that she'd made things very difficult, and that he'd had to end it for his own well-being. A pause. He said the breakup had been hard because he'd cared about her so much, but that some people just weren't capable of healthy relationships. Kevin closed his eyes briefly, opened them. He said, do you know her last name? Emma said, Hines, I think. Carla Hines. I only heard the name twice. Kevin was already pulling out his personal phone, not his work phone. Emma noticed the personal one. He typed something, stared at the screen. He said, she moved to Sacramento 2 years ago. Rex said, but she's findable. Kevin looked at him. Rex said, I'm not telling you what to do, Kevin. I'm not asking you to do anything except look at what's in front of you. You've got a woman at this table who has 8 months of documented history, an independent witness account, a legal filing in process, and a note she wrote to herself in a coffee can. He paused. And now you've got a name. Kevin looked at Emma. Emma met his gaze directly. She'd found somewhere in the last hour a reservoir of calm that surprised her, not the absence of fear, but the presence of something that had more weight than fear. She'd written herself a note 8 months ago and kept it, and she'd made a sign this morning, and somebody had seen it, and now she was sitting across from a cop who'd come in as Ryan's ally and was reconsidering everything. She was not going to waste this moment by flinching. She said, he told you I was having episodes. Kevin said yes. He used that word specifically. Episodes. Yes, Emma reached into her pocket. She put the note on the table, the folded paper from the coffee can, her own handwriting, 8 months old. She unfolded it and turned it toward him. You are not crazy. You are not making it up. You are not too sensitive. Get out. Kevin read it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, when did you write this? 8 months ago, Emma said. The night after I opened a secret bank account because I'd been saving $5 at a time to have something that was mine. She paused. I hid it in a coffee can on a high shelf in the kitchen. I forgot about it until this morning. Another pause. When I went back to get my documents. Kevin looked at her. You went back to the apartment. My birth certificate and passport are mine, Emma said. I went to get them. Kevin's expression shifted slightly. Emma caught it, not judgment, something more complicated. Something that was reassessing the timeline, fitting pieces together in a new order. He said, Ryan just texted me. He's asking where I am. Rex said, what are you going to tell him? Kevin set his personal phone face down on the table, which was not exactly an answer, but was entirely an answer. Sarah said, Kevin, Veronica Chen is filing for a temporary protective order this afternoon. The judge has the evidence package. The filing establishes a legal record with a timestamp. She looked at him steadily. You came here out of uniform on your personal phone. You've been at this table for 12 minutes. What you do at the next 12 is your decision. Kevin looked at her. You're asking me to make a statement. I'm telling you what is happening today, Sarah said. What you do with that information is yours. A long beat of silence. Then Kevin's work phone buzzed. He looked at it, not at the screen, just at the phone itself, and something moved through his face. He reached down and turned the work phone face down next to the personal phone. He said to Emma, tell me about the texts he showed me. Walk me through why you're certain you didn't write them. Emma said, because I know my own voice, and those texts don't sound like me. I don't write in complete formal sentences when I'm texting. I use abbreviations. I never use the word regarding. Those texts used it twice. She paused. And because in the second one, the person says they're scared of what they might do to themselves. I have never in my life felt that way. Not once. The version of me that was most afraid in that apartment was afraid of him, not of myself. Kevin said, he could argue he was afraid for you, that he mischaracterized the situation but out of genuine concern. He could, Emma said, and that's probably what he'll do. Kevin said, how do you prove he sent them from your phone? Sarah said, you can't always, but you establish the pattern and the means and the motive. Ryan had the passcode, had regular unsupervised access, and had a documented interest in establishing Emma as mentally unstable before she had the chance to establish what was actually happening. She paused. The texts aligned too perfectly with the narrative he'd been building publicly for months. That's not proof in isolation, but in combination with everything else, it's a story a judge can read. Kevin nodded slowly. He looked at Emma again, and whatever had been shifting in him during the last 15 minutes had shifted enough that his expression was different now. It still had caution in it. He was a careful man, a professional, someone who understood that his job required him not to move on incomplete information. But the careful distance of the man who'd walked in to do Ryan a favor was gone, replaced by something more like the careful attention of someone trying to see something correctly. He said on Thursday, I need to make a call. Rex said, who to? Kevin said, my sergeant. Not about Ryan, about procedure, specifically about what a uniformed officer's obligations are when a civilian brings them credible evidence of an ongoing domestic situation. He paused. I've been running this morning as a personal favor. I need to figure out where the professional line is. Sarah looked at him for a moment. Then she said, room at the end of the counter is usually quieter. Kevin picked up both phones and walked to the end of the counter. Emma watched him go. She said quietly, I didn't expect that. Rex said, neither did I entirely. Mrs. Garza, who had been sitting at the end of the booth in silence for the last 20 minutes, with the equanimity of a woman who had lived through enough to know when to speak and when to simply be present, said, I expected it. Both Rex and Emma looked at her. She said, a person who is truly corrupt does not have a complicated face. His face has been complicated since he sat down. She went back to her coffee. He will do the right thing. Rex watched her for a second, and a very slight smile went across his face, the kind that belonged to a man who had spent 30 years being right about people and occasionally had the pleasure of meeting someone else who shared the skill. Emma's prepaid phone buzzed. Maya. The text said outside, there are a lot of motorcycles. Is this normal for you now? Emma typed back, come in, ask for the middle booth. 30 seconds later, the door opened and Maya Carter walked in. She was 32, 3 years older than Emma, with the same blonde hair and the sharper, more direct version of Emma's face, the same bone structure with different software running on it. She'd been on a plane for an hour and then in a rideshare for 40 minutes from the Meadowsfield Airport, and she looked like someone who had spent the journey in a state of focused, controlled urgency that she was now releasing in the direction of her sister. She walked straight to the booth. She didn't look at Rex or Sarah or Mrs. Garza. She looked at Emma. Emma looked at her. For a second, neither of them said anything. Then Maya slid into the booth beside Emma, not across from her, beside her, pushing Emma slightly toward the window, and she put her arm around her sister's shoulders, and she said quietly in the tone of voice that belongs only to people who have known each other their entire lives, I'm here, I got here. Emma leaned into her sister. She did it the way a person leans into something real after a long time of holding themselves up through sheer force of will, not collapsing, not breaking, just allowing herself to rest against the wall, something solid for the first time and longer than she should have had to wait. She said, I know you're here. Rex and Sarah and Mrs. Garza let the moment be what it was. Lily behind the counter saw it from across the room, and she pressed her lips together briefly and then turned and found something to do with her hands. After a moment, Maya pulled back and looked at her sister's face with the direct assessing look of a woman taking inventory. She looked at Emma's wrist where the sleeves had ridden up. She looked at the slight shadows under Emma's eyes. She did not say anything about what she saw. She just looked, and her jaw was tight, and then she let it go. She looked at Rex. He met her gaze. She said, you're grim. Rex, he said. Emma said, Rex, Maya said. She also said you sat down across from her this morning and told her the truth was a liar. Rex looked at Emma. Emma said, I told her what you said about the voice. Rex said to Maya, she did the hard part. Maya looked at him for a moment longer with the expression of someone completing an assessment. Then she said, thank you. And she said it simply without embellishment, the way people say things when they mean them past the point of language. Rex nodded once. Kevin came back from the end of the counter. He looked at the new person in the booth and he said to Emma, your sister. Maya, Emma said. Kevin introduced himself. Maya looked at him with no particular warmth. He said to Emma, I talked to my sergeant. She knows Sarah's program, and she knows Veronica Chen, and she told me that if I have reason to believe a domestic violence situation is ongoing, my obligation is professional, not personal. He paused. I have reason to believe. Emma said, what does that mean practically? Kevin said, it means I'm going to drive to the precinct in the next hour, and I'm going to sit down with my sergeant, and I'm going to tell her what Ryan told me this morning and what I observed when I came in here and what I observed when I went to the apartment. He held her gaze. And then I'm going to tell her about Carla Hines. The table was very quiet. Emma said, you're going to tell her about Carla. Kevin said, if this is a pattern, and I have been sitting at this table for half an hour thinking about whether this is a pattern, then Carla Hines is relevant. And my sergeant is going to want to know whether there's a prior relationship that shows the same characteristics. He paused. I should have made this call 3 years ago. I didn't. I'm making it now. Sarah said, Kevin, I want to make sure you understand what you're doing. He said, I'm doing my job. 19 years late on part of it, but I'm doing it. Sarah nodded. She reached into her bag and handed him a card. Veronica Chen's contact. She's the legal advocate handling Emma's protective order filing. She'll want to know you're cooperating. Kevin took the card. He looked at Emma one more time. I'm sorry I came in here this morning the way I did. Emma said, you came back. He looked at her. She said, you could have just stayed Ryan's friend. It would have been easier. Kevin said, easier isn't the same as right. He left. The diner held the absence of him for a moment. Then Maya said, okay, someone explain to me what's happening with the judge and the 430 filing. Sarah took Maya through it efficiently. Rex listened. Mrs. Garza finished her coffee. Emma sat beside her sister, with her shoulder touching Maya's, and her eyes moving between Sarah's face and the window, and back processing, tracking, staying with the thread. At 4:17, Veronica Chen called Sarah's phone. Sarah answered, listened, said yes 3 times, said thank you, ended the call. She set the phone on the table. She looked at Emma. She said, the judge reviewed the emergency filing. Given the evidence package, the voicemail, the text history, Mrs. Garza's documented account, the photograph, and your recorded declaration, she granted the temporary protective order. Emma stared at her. Effective immediately, Sarah said. Ryan Mitchell is legally required to stay a minimum of 100 yards from your person. He cannot contact you by any means. Violation is an arrestable offense. Maya grabbed Emma's hand under the table. Emma didn't say anything for a moment. She was thinking about the voice Ryan had installed in her over 2 years, the one that said, nobody will believe you, and you have no options, and you need me, and you're nothing without this. The voice she'd been trying to argue with for 8 months and winning against in small, invisible increments. $5 at a time, 1 secret account, 1 note in a coffee can. She thought about what Rex had said this morning. That voice is lying to you. She said, it's done. Sarah said, it's the beginning. There's still a hearing in 21 days, and the process is going to be longer than today. But yes, today's part is done. Emma nodded. She picked up the note from the table, the one in her own handwriting. She held it for a moment, looking at it, and then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. She wasn't throwing it away. She was keeping it for when she needed to remember. Rex's phone buzzed. He read the message. His expression changed in the particular way that it did when something mattered. Emma said, what? Rex said, Greg Hollister called Marco. Apparently Ryan called Hollister when Kevin left the apartment, and whatever Kevin said to Ryan before he left, or whatever Ryan figured out on his own about where Kevin went, Ryan panicked. Hollister is advising him not to file the counter injunction. Sarah looked up sharply. Hollister is advising him not to file. Rex said, that's what Marco says. Sarah said slowly, if Hollister is pulling back the counterfiling, it means he's looked at the evidence we submitted and decided that filing against Emma right now would make Ryan look worse, not better. Emma said, he's running. Rex said, he's recalculating. Emma said, that's the same thing. Rex looked at her. He almost smiled. She said, 2 hours ago, he was building a story where he was the victim. Now he's telling his lawyer not to file. That means the story isn't working anymore. Sarah said, because the story requires you to be isolated and unsupported and undocumented. And you are none of those things anymore. Emma thought about Ryan in the apartment right now, or wherever he was. She thought about him on the phone with Hollister. She thought about the version of events he'd been building for months, the careful, patient, brick-by-brick construction of a narrative, where Emma was the problem. Emma was unstable. Emma was the one who needed managing. She thought about how that narrative required Emma to have nobody, and she looked around the table. Sarah Williams, who had come because Rex called and had not stopped moving since she walked in the door. Mrs. Garza, who had taken a taxi to 3 diners with 8 months of handwritten notes in her house dress pocket. Maya, who had bought a terrible airport burrito and gotten on a plane at 30 minutes' notice. Lily, who had filled coffee cups and provided napkins and stayed long past the end of her shift. Kevin Sloan, who had walked in as Ryan's man and walked out as his own. Veronica Chen, who had gotten it on a judge on the phone in 3 hours. And Rex, who had sat in a corner booth on a Tuesday morning in July and refused to look away. Emma said, he built his whole plan on me having nobody. Rex said, yes. Emma said, he was wrong about that from the beginning. Rex said, yes. Maya squeezed her hand under the table. Outside, the motorcycles were still in the parking lot. They'd been there since mid-morning, patient and present, a ring of chosen protection that had never needed to raise its voice. Inside, the ceiling fans turned, and the coffee stayed hot, and the Route 99 diner went about its Tuesday afternoon business around a booth where everything had changed. Emma picked up her coffee mug. She took a long sip. She set it down. She said, what happens now? Rex said, now we get you through tonight. The Clear Path House. Maya with you. Clean phone, clean address. Tonight you sleep. Emma said, and then? Sarah said, and then tomorrow we start the next part. Maya nodded. She thought about the next part. The hearing in 21 days, the longer process, the days that would be hard and the days that would be harder, and the days somewhere down the line that would start being something other than survival. She thought about Dana, who had taught her the sign. She thought about the last text she'd sent Dana 8 months ago, breezy and brief and carefully normal, and how Dana had responded with call me anytime, no explanation required, and how the offer had still been there. She knew it had still been there even though she hadn't been able to take it. She said, I need to call someone. Rex looked at her. She said, the friend who taught me the name, Dana, I need to call her and tell her it worked. Something moved across Rex's face, the kind of thing that didn't have a name, but that people who have spent decades doing hard things recognize in each other. He said, yeah, you do. Emma reached for the prepaid phone. Maya watched her sister dial a number with steady hands, watched her sit up straight in the booth, watched the expression on her face, the complicated, layered, almost unrecognizable expression of a woman who had made a sign on a table that morning and been seen and said help, and found it, and was now sitting in a diner in the late afternoon with a temporary protective order in the legal record, and her sister's hand in hers, and a phone pressed to her ear waiting for a friend to pick up. The phone rang. Once, twice, and then Dana's voice came through, live and real and immediate, and Emma Carter closed her eyes for 1 second and then opened them and said, Dana, it's Emma. I'm okay. Her voice caught briefly and then steadied. I just needed you to know the sign worked. Dana picked up on the third ring. She said, Emma, just that one word, her name with everything in it? Not surprised exactly. More like someone who had been keeping a light on so long that when they finally heard the knock, they almost couldn't believe it was real. Emma said, yeah, it's me. A beat of silence. Then Dana said, are you safe? I'm safe, Emma said. I'm in a diner. I have people with me. Oh, another beat. Emma could hear Dana breathing on the other end, could hear her working through whatever she was feeling, the relief, the complicated tangle of 8 months of silence that neither of them was going to be able to address in the next 30 seconds. Dana said the sign worked. The sign worked, Emma said. Someone saw it. He sat down across from me and he didn't look away. Her voice was steady. I wanted you to know because you taught me, because you sat with me that night and made me learn it even when I told you I'd never need it. Dinah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful in the way voices get when a person is managing something large. I knew you'd need it, she said. I just couldn't say it that way. I know, Emma said. Are you really okay? Not, I'm fine, okay, actually okay. Emma looked at the table, at the note in her pocket, at Maya beside her, at Rex across from her with his coffee and his 27 years of paying attention, at Sarah with her notebook and Veronica Chen's number and a judge who had read the evidence and said enough. She said, I'm going to be okay. That's the accurate version. Donna said, that's the right version. They talked for 6 more minutes, not about everything. Everything would take longer than this diner could hold. But the shape of it, the broad strokes. Dana cried at some point and didn't apologize for it, which was very Donna. And Emma didn't cry, which surprised her a little, and she thought it was because she'd done the main portion of the crying earlier, and what she was feeling now was something different. Lighter. Not happy exactly. It was too complicated and too early for happy, but oriented. Like a compass that had been spinning for 2 years and had finally found north. When they hung up, Emma held the phone for a moment. Maya said, good. Emma said, yeah. Maya said, she sounds like a good person. She's the best person, Emma said. I let him take her from me, and I'm going to spend a long time being angry at myself about that. Rex said, don't. Emma looked at him. He said, spend that energy somewhere else. Being angry at yourself for the things he engineered that is giving him credit he doesn't deserve. Emma held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Not because the feeling went away. It didn't. It was still there, that low undertow of self-reproach for the years and the friendships and the mornings she'd spent trying to be better for someone who had decided from the beginning that better was never quite enough. But because Rex was right that feeding it was a choice, and she would bunt making choices that served Ryan Mitchell. She was done with that whole category of choices. Sarah's phone rang. She looked at the screen and something in her expression sharpened. She answered, listened for 45 seconds, and said, when? Then thank you, Veronica. She ended the call and looked at the table. She said Ryan's attorney made contact with Veronica Chen. The table went quiet. Emma said Hollister. Not Hollister, Sarah said. Different attorney. Someone named Patricia Osei. She does criminal defense and family law, downtown firm, solid reputation. Legitimate. She paused. Ryan dismissed Hollister. Rex said he fired his lawyer and hired someone else, Sarah said. Someone better. Maya said, is that good or bad? Sarah said, it's interesting. Hollister was a bully's attorney, file, fast file, aggressive, make noise, and hope the other side runs. Osei is different. She's careful. She doesn't take cases she can't win, and she doesn't file things designed to intimidate. A pause. If Ryan hired Osei, it means someone, maybe Osei herself before she agreed to take the case, looked at what we filed this afternoon and told him that the aggressive play was off the table. Emma said, she looked at the evidence and told him it wouldn't work. That's my read, Sarah said, which means Ryan is now operating under legal advice that acknowledges the strength of your position. She looked at Emma directly. That's good. That's actually good. Emma absorbed this. The mechanics of it were almost abstract from where she was sitting. She was tired in a bone-deep way that had been building since long before this morning, and the emotional math of the day was adding up in ways that would take time to fully calculate. But she understood the shape of what Sarah was saying. Ryan had walked into this day with a strategy. The strategy was failing. And the measure of how badly it was failing was the fact that he'd been forced to change lawyers mid-afternoon on the same day he'd thought he was going to win. She said, what does Osei want? Sarah said, her opening position is that Ryan wants to arrange the retrieval of any personal property from the apartment without violating the protective order, and that he's prepared to discuss the lease transition cooperatively. Another pause. That's not a man who thinks he's winning. That's a man whose lawyer has told him to stop making things worse. Mrs. Garza said from the end of the table without looking up from her coffee, good. Rex said, Osei's a smart woman. She saw the voicemail, the text, the photograph, the documented pattern. She told him the truth. He looked at Emma. Ryan has spent 2 years surrounding himself with people who told him what he wanted to hear. His lawyer told him the truth and he didn't like it, and now he has to live with the reality of what he's built. Emma said, he's going to be so angry. Rex said, probably. Emma said, not at the situation. At me. Specifically at me. He's going to decide this is something I did to him. Rex said, he's already decided that. Emma said, that worries me, not the legal part. The him. The fact that he's somewhere in the city right now angry, in the specific way he gets angry, and I know what that looks like. Sarah said, the protective order is active. Any contact is an arrestable offense. And Kevin Sloan is at the precinct right now with his sergeant. Emma said Kevin being at the precinct doesn't make Ryan less angry. Sarah said no, but it means that anger has consequences now that it didn't have this morning. She held Emma's gaze. You cannot control what Ryan feels. You never could, even when he convinced you that his feelings were your responsibility. What you can control is where you are and who's with you and what protections are in place. She paused. Tonight you're at the Clear Path House. He doesn't have that address. He can't come there. Emma nodded. Maya put her hand on Emma's arm. I'll be there. Emma looked at her sister. You can't stay in Bakersfield indefinitely. You have a job. Maya said, I have PTO and a very understanding manager, and I am not leaving California until you are established somewhere that is not that apartment. So let's skip the part where you try to manage my inconvenience. Emma said, I'm not trying to, Emma, Maya said. Stop. Mama stopped. Maya said more quietly, you spent 2 years making yourself smaller, so he had room. You're not doing that with me. The words landed in the middle of Emma's chest and stayed there. She said, okay. Maya said, okay. Rex was watching the two of them with an expression that was doing several things at once, the satisfaction of someone who has seen a piece of a larger mechanism click into place and something older and more personal that he kept carefully contained. He thought about Carol again. He couldn't help it. Days like this always brought Carol back, not in the devastating way of the first decade, but in the quieter way of someone whose life has become the answer to a question you asked too late. He thought about what it would have meant for Carol to have had a Maya, a sister who took PO and bought terrible airport burritos and got on planes. He thought she might have made it. He put Carol away the way he always did, not dismissing her. Never dismissing her, but returning her to the place where she lived in him, the place that had become over 27 years less like a wound and more like a foundation. He said, Emma. She looked at him. He said, tonight you sleep. Tomorrow you talk to Veronica, and you talk to Sarah, and you start the longer process. But right now, in the next hour, I need you to do one thing. She said, what? He said, eat something real. Emma stared at him. Then she laughed. The same kind of laugh as before, real, involuntary, taking her by surprise. Maya looked between her sister and this large, gray-bearded man with genuine bewilderment. Emma said, he told me the same thing this morning. Eggs. Protein. Rex said, and you ate them and you handled everything that came under. So Lily appeared at the table from nowhere, the way Lily always appeared, her timing impeccable in the way that belonged to people who paid attention as a default setting. She said, kitchen starting the dinner menu, burger, soup, the good chili. What do we need? Everyone ordered. Even Mrs. Garza, who said she would have the chili because she had taken a taxi twice today and she deserved something warm. Even Rex, who ordered the same breakfast platter he always ordered, regardless of the time of day, because some things didn't require adjusting. While they waited, something shifted in the texture of the booth. The acute forward-leaning urgency of the last several hours, the filings and the phone calls, and the lawyer changes in Kevin Sloan's complicated face settled into something more like the aftermath of a storm. Still real, still present, but changed. The rain had done its worst and was doing something else now. Maya said to Rex, Emma told me on the phone that you lost someone a long time ago. Rex said, Carol. Maya said, and that's why you do this. Rex considered the question the way he considered most questions, not quickly, not as a reflex, but as something worth taking the time to answer correctly. He said, that's why I started doing this. It's not why I keep doing it. Maya said, what's why you keep doing it? Rex gestured almost imperceptibly toward Emma. Emma had looked away toward the window, watching the last of the afternoon heat work its way across the parking lot. She didn't see the gesture. Rex thought that was fine. Some things didn't need to be witnessed to be true. He said, because it works. Because the sign works when someone sees it. Because this morning a woman walked in here believing she was completely alone, and by 4:30 there was a judge and a legal record and a sister on a plane and a neighbor with 8 months of notes. He paused. That's not a miracle. That's what happens when people don't look away. That's repeatable. That's worth doing again. Maya looked at him for a long moment. She said, thank you for not looking away. Rex said, thank her. She made the sign. The food arrived. The table was quiet in the way that tables get quiet when people are eating and don't need to fill the silence when the silence itself is comfortable, not empty, but settled. Mrs. Garza ate her chili with the focused appreciation of a woman who had earned it. Sarah went through her notes, between bites her pen, moving occasionally. Maya ate with one shoulder touching Emma's, a constant small pressure that said, I'm here without requiring words. Emma ate. She ate like someone who hadn't been eating properly for longer than she could accurately track. Not frantically, not demonstratively, just steadily with the focused attention of a body that was finally receiving what it had been asking for. Halfway through her burger, she said without preamble, I'm going to be angry later. Rex looked up. Emma said, I'm not angry right now. I've been scared and determined and relieved and sad and a lot of other things, but I haven't been angry yet. And I know it's coming. It's going to come when the practical stuff settles down and I have room for it. Sarah said, that's normal. Emma said, I know it's normal. I'm saying it out loud because she stopped, thought, because I used to not let myself be angry. It wasn't safe to be angry. Ryan had a way of taking my anger and turning it into evidence of my instability, so I learned not to have it. She looked at her plate. I'm going to have it. Rex said, good. Emma said, I'm going to be really genuinely furious. Rex said, good. Use it. Emma said, Aedius, for what? Rex said, whatever comes next. Anger is just energy. It's what you pointed at that matters. Emma thought about that. She thought about Dana and the sign and the 8 months of saving and the note in the coffee can. She thought about the fact that at some level, even at her most afraid and most isolated, she had been pointing her energy at something toward the door, toward the eventual possibility of the door, toward the idea of a morning that looked different from every morning that had come before it. She'd been angry for 8 months. She just hadn't been allowed to call it that. Her old phone, the one with Ryan's tracking app, which Sarah had handled, and backed up and which was now sitting in a Faraday bag at the bottom of Sarah's organized tote, buzzed. They all heard it. Nobody moved to answer it. Sarah said, that'll keep happening for a while. The contact attempts will be frequent at first and then they'll decrease as his attorney advises him that each one is a potential violation. She paused. Or they won't decrease and we'll have a different conversation. But either way, you don't respond. Emma said, I know. She looked at the bag. It's strange, hearing it and not reaching for it. I've been conditioned to respond to that sound for 2 years. Maya said, you'll get unconditioned. Emma said, how long does that take? Maya said, I don't know, but I'll be annoying about reminding you that you don't have to answer it for however long it takes. Emma said, that's fair. Rex's phone buzzed. He read the message and set it down without a change in expression. Emma said, Marco. Rex said, Kevin. Everyone looked at him. Rex said, he called Carla Hines in Sacramento. The table went still. Rex said, she talked to him for 40 minutes. Sarah set down her fork. Rex said, he's not giving me details. He said he can't professionally, but he said the conversation confirmed that the pattern predates Emma by at least 3 years, and that Carla has documentation. Emma said, Carla has documentation. Rex said, photographs, messages, journals she kept. She kept everything. He paused. She just never had anyone call her and ask about it. Emma thought about Carla Hines, whom she'd never met, whose name she'd only heard twice, who had left a gas station conversation with Kevin Sloan 3 years ago, saying that's what he'd say, and gone home to Sacramento and kept a journal and a folder of photographs because some part of her had known that someday it would matter. 2 women, same blueprint, same carefully constructed story about their instability, same pattern of isolation and narrative control applied in sequence to 2 different lives. She said, he's done this before. Rex said, yes. She said, which means he'll do it again, after me, if nothing stops him. Rex said, "That's exactly right." Emma looked at Sarah. "What does Carla's documentation mean for the process?" Sarah said, "It potentially transforms a domestic violence protective order into a documented pattern of conduct with multiple victims. That's a different legal conversation. That's something Veronica Chen will need to know about immediately." She was already reaching for her phone. Emma said, does she know about me?" Rex said. "She does now. Kevin told her what happened today. He said she cried." Emma pressed her lips together. She thought about a woman in Sacramento who had kept photographs in a journal for 3 years, waiting without knowing what she was waiting for, keeping evidence for a day that never came. And then today it came not for her, for someone else, but the journal still mattered. The photographs still mattered. The 40 minutes she spent on the phone with Kevin Sloan still mattered. Emma said, "I want to talk to her." Sarah looked up from her phone. Emma said, "Not today, not this week maybe, but I want to talk to Carla Hines. I want her to know that what she kept was worth keeping." Sarah said, "I think that can happen." Emma nodded. She picked up her burger and took another bite, and the table settled back into its working quiet. Sarah on the phone with Veronica, Rex reading something on his phone with the same deliberate attention he gave everything. Maya beside Emma with her shoulder, a constant warm presence. Mrs. Garza finishing her chili with the satisfaction of someone who had done what she'd set out to do. Outside, the motorcycles in the parking lot had thinned. Most of Rex's crew had dispersed over the course of the afternoon as the acute situation resolved. The visible, deliberate ring of presence had done its job in the morning and didn't need to be a permanent fixture. Danny remained. One other man Emma didn't know the name of. It was enough. The July heat was easing, not gone. It was Bakersfield in July. It was never truly gone until well after dark, but softening at the edges the way heat does in late afternoon when the light starts coming in at a different angle. At 6:12, Sarah said, "We should get you to the house before it gets too late." Emma said, "Yeah." She started gathering things, the envelope of documents, the grandmother's coat which she folded carefully over her arm, the photograph of her and Maya, the note already in her pocket. Mrs. Garza stood up. Emma looked at her. Mrs. Garza said, "You will keep in touch." It wasn't a question. Emma said, "Yes, I will." Mrs. Garza looked at her for a moment with the direct, undecorated gaze that had characterized everything she'd done today. The taxi rides and the handwritten notes and the chili and the steady, unhurried presence of a woman who had decided that watching was no longer enough and had acted on that decision with everything she had. She said, "You are a strong woman, Mija. You always were. You just had someone standing on top of you." Emma's throat worked. She said, "Thank you for writing things down." Mrs. Garza patted Emma's hand once firmly and then picked up her purse and walked toward the door with the unhurried dignity of someone who had done what she'd come to do. Lily came out from behind the counter. Emma looked at her. Lily said, "I put the sign up." Emma said, "What?" Lily reached into her apron and pulled out a small laminated card. On it was a simple diagram, a hand fingers positioned in the specific gesture that Emma had made on the table that morning. Underneath it in plain text the words, "If you need help, we see you." She set it on the counter by the register. Emma stared at it. She said, "Lily." Lily said, "I looked it up this afternoon during my break. There's a whole network of businesses that have agreed to have staff trained in the signal. Bakersfield isn't on the list." She paused. "I'm putting us on the list." Emma didn't have words for a moment. She said, "You've been working a shift this whole time." Lily shrugged. "It was a slow morning until you came in." Emma laughed. She crossed the distance and she hugged Lily Morgan, who was 24 years old and had been paying attention when most people wouldn't have, who had poured coffee and brought pie and provided napkins and placed a card on the counter that might someday be the first thing someone else saw when they needed to know that someone was watching. Lily hugged her back with the matter-of-fact warmth of someone who didn't make things more complicated than they needed to be. She said quietly into Emma's shoulder, "You come back here when you're on the other side of it." Emma said, "I will." She meant it. Rex was standing near the door. Emma walked over to him, and she stood in front of him, and she tried to find the thing to say, the adequate thing, the right-sized thing, the thing that would carry the weight of what this man had done by simply refusing to look away from a small gesture on a table in a roadside diner on a Tuesday morning in July. She couldn't find it. She said, "I don't know how to thank you." Rex said, "You don't owe me thanks." Emma said, "Rex." He looked at her. She said, "You sat down across from a stranger and you told her the truth. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to make the call or stay or put people in the parking lot or talk to Kevin Sloan or any of it. You could have finished your coffee and minded your own business." Rex said no. Emma said no. Rex said, "I couldn't. That's the whole point. Some people look at something wrong and choose to mind their business. I'm not built that way anymore. Maybe I never was, and the loss of Carol just clarified it." He paused. "So you don't owe me thanks for being who I am. That's not a favor. That's just me." Emma looked at him. She said, "Then thank you for being who you are." Rex held her gaze. He said, "You take care of yourself." Emma said, "I'm going to." She said it the way she said most things now. Not with the brittle, managed certainty of someone performing confidence, but with the grounded, forward-looking weight of someone who means it and knows the difference. Maya appeared at her elbow. "Okay, car's outside. Sarah's ready." Emma turned toward the door. She stopped. She looked back at the diner, at Lily behind the counter, at the small, laminated card by the register, at the booth in the middle of the room where she'd sat down that morning with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug and her eyes checking the parking lot, and everything she'd ever believed about herself and her options, shaped by 2 years of someone else's careful, patient work. The booth looked ordinary now. Worn vinyl laminate table, a coffee ring near the edge. Just a booth. But it wasn't. It never would be again, not for Emma, not for Lily, not for anyone who'd been in this room today. She thought about the morning, the long-sleeved shirt in the July heat, the way she'd sat down and wrapped both hands around the mug and felt the ground of her life at its absolute most contracted, smallest apartment. Fewest options, no people. The voice in her head saying, "This is all there is, and you should be grateful for it." She thought about the moment her hand moved on the table. She hadn't planned it. She'd done it the way you do things that come from somewhere below conscious decision, from the place where the self that hasn't given up yet lives below all the fear and conditioning and managed silence doing its small, persistent work. She'd made a sign, and Rex Callahan, in a corner booth with his back to the wall, in 30 years of paying attention, had seen it. Everything that followed had followed from that. She pushed through the door. The evening air was still warm, and the parking lot still held the last of Danny's presence. And a sky going gold at the edges, the way California skies go in late summer. The light making everything look slightly more significant than it usually does. Maya said, "You ready?" Emma said, "Yeah." They walked to the car. The next day, Emma woke up in a room that was quiet and entirely hers, with no sound coming from the other side of a wall that she was afraid to breathe too loud near. And she lay there for a moment and let the quiet be what it was. New, safe, real. She had 21 days until the hearing. She had Veronica Chen and Sarah in a protective order and Carla Hines' journal. She had Kevin Sloan Sargent in a legal record with a timestamp and a lawyer named Patricia Osei who had looked at the evidence and told her client the truth. She had Mrs. Garza's handwritten pages in a backed-up phone and her own recorded testimony, clear and sequential. The voice of a woman who had been paying attention to her own life even when she'd been told to stop. She had Dana back. She had Maya in the next room. She had the note in her pocket. She got up. She called Sarah at 8:30 and they went through the day's steps. She called Veronica at 9 and they talked about the hearing preparation. She ate breakfast, real breakfast eggs, the thing Rex had told her twice to do, and she sat at the small table in the Clear Path House kitchen, and she thought about what came next with the focused, forward-facing attention of a woman who had spent too long looking over her shoulder and was done with the view. 3 weeks later, she sat across a table from Ryan Mitchell for the last time. Not alone. Never alone again, not in rooms like that. Sarah was beside her. Veronica Chen was at the end of the table. Ryan's attorney, Patricia Osei, was across from Veronica, and Osei's face was professionally neutral, in the way that attorneys practice. But her eyes kept going to the evidence binder on the table, and there was something in the set of her jaw that said she had read everything in it and had not enjoyed doing so. Ryan looked at Emma. Emma looked at Ryan. She had thought about this moment, had run through versions of it in the quiet of the Clear Path House, and later in Maya's guest room in Phoenix, where she'd moved while the longer process unfolded. She had imagined what she would feel. The fear, certainly she had expected the fear. Maybe anger, maybe the complicated grief of looking at someone you'd loved and seeing them clearly for the first time. She hadn't expected calm, But that was what was there. Underneath the fear and alongside it, and ultimately larger than it, a deep-rooted Clearwater calm that had been built. She understood not today, but across every day since the diner. Across every day she'd eaten breakfast and called Sarah and worked with Veronica and talked to Dana and let Maya be annoying about which calls she answered. Across every day she'd been quietly and incrementally and with no drama whatsoever, building the life that the other life had been preventing. Ryan said finally, "You didn't have to do this." Emma said, "Yes, I did." He said, "I loved you." Emma said, "I know you believe that." She said it without cruelty and without performance. She said it because it was the truest, most precise thing she could say about what Ryan had done and what he was, not a monster in a simple sense, not a cartoon, but a man who had found a way to make control feel like love for long enough that he'd convinced himself of it too. The tragedy of that, the real and genuine tragedy, was something she had allowed herself to feel in private. In the small hours of certain nights in Phoenix, when the clarity of the distance showed her the full shape of what had been. She had felt it. She had let it be what it was. And then she had gotten up the next morning. Patricia Osei said, "Ms. Carter, my client is prepared to." Emma said, "I heard the terms." She looked at Veronica. Veronica said, "Emma, take whatever time you need." Emma didn't need time. She had done the thinking. She knew what she was signing and what she wasn't, what she was accepting and what she was not, what the legal reality was going forward, and what her life on the other side of this table looked like. She looked at Ryan one more time, not with hatred, not with the weight of everything she'd lost, with the particular clear-eyed steadiness of a woman who is about to close a door and knows completely that she is not going to open it again. She said, "You told me for 2 years that I was powerless, that I couldn't function without you, that the story of my life only made sense with you in the center of it." She paused. "You were wrong about all of it." Ryan said nothing. Emma signed what needed signing. She stood up. She walked out. Maya was waiting in the hallway. She didn't ask how it went. She could see how it went. She'd always been able to read Emma's face, and what she read now was something she'd been waiting 3 years to see there. Emma said, "It's done." Maya said, "Yeah." Emma said, "Yeah." Maya pulled her sister into a hug, a real one, the kind that happens between people who have known each other their whole lives and have just survived something together. She said into Emma's hair, "So what happens now?" Emma said, "Whatever I want." And she meant it. That was the thing that was different about the way she said it. Not the words, which were simple enough, but the weight behind them. The ownership. The fact that the sentence belonged entirely to her. No caveat, no qualification, no voice underneath it saying, "But only if you're careful, but only if you don't push, but only if you remember who makes the rules." Whatever she wanted. She stood in the hallway outside that room with her sister's arms around her and the grandmother's coat over her arm and the note in her pocket and her whole life ahead of her, and she understood with the complete settled clarity of something that doesn't need to be said twice what the diner had given her. Not rescue. She hadn't needed rescuing. She had needed someone to see a small gesture on a table and choose in that moment not to look away. She had needed the space and the time and the people to remember what she already knew, that she was not powerless, that the voice was a liar, that the options were wider than she'd been taught to believe. She had done the rest herself. 6 months later, Amanda Carter walked back into the Route 99 diner on a Saturday morning when the July heat was a memory and the September air was cooler and the parking lot held ordinary cars instead of motorcycles. She sat in the middle booth. Lily came over. She was smiling before she even reached the table. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Emma said. Lily poured the coffee. She looked at Emma, really looked the way she'd learned to look at people who came through that door, and what she saw was different from the woman who'd sat here in July. Not a different person. The same person, same face, same blue eyes. But something in the posture and the quality of the gaze and the way Emma held herself in the world had changed in the way that things change when they've been through heat and come out the other side harder and clearer and more themselves. Emma put her hand flat on the table. Not a sign, just her hand resting easy on the surface. Lily looked at it. Emma said, "Rex is coming, and Sarah, and Mrs. Garza if she's not too busy." Lily said, "I'll pull the big table." Emma said, "And I want the pie, the peach kind." Lily said, "It's September. That's apple now." Emma said, "That works too." She sat and she drank her coffee, and she waited for her people, and she was not afraid of anything that walked through the door, and she was not looking over her shoulder, and she was not counting down the minutes until she could leave. She was exactly where she had chosen to be. That was everything. That was the whole of it. A woman had walked into a diner in July with bruises hidden beneath her sleeves and a desperate, nearly hopeless gesture held in her hand like the last coin in a pocket. And someone had seen it, and she had let herself be seen. And she had stayed in her seat, and she had told the truth, and the truth had done what truth does when it's finally allowed to move through a room without being stopped. It changed things. Not all at once, not without cost, not cleanly or easily, or in the uncomplicated way that stories sometimes make it look, but completely. Emma Carter was free. She had been the one to free herself with a sign with a note in a coffee can with $400 saved, 5 at a time, with the part of her that never stopped believing the door existed even when she couldn't see it. Nobody had given her that. It had always been hers.